Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open a handful of Greek myths so low energy, so weirdly tragic, and so full of celestial nonsense that you might just drift off before we even get to the Minotaurs or the Golden Rain. You've probably heard the big names, Zeus, Hera, swans, bulls, eggs, but what happens when you zoom in on the quieter stories? The ones where nobody ends up a hero, and most people just sort of get mildly destroyed. These are the sad little footnotes in the drama of Olympus. And yeah, you probably won't survive this if you're a mortal woman who catches Zeus's attention. Sorry, it's the myth lore. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is, that's always fun to see. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It always starts with the sky, or a cloud, or a thunderclap. Whatever version you read, the affairs of Zeus rarely arrive quietly. He's the king of gods, the storm-wielding ruler of Olympus, and his hobbies include shapeshifting into various animals and pursuing mortals who honestly didn't ask for it. Like, not even once. And while it's tempting to imagine these liaisons as grand romantic tales, with harp music and roses, they usually start more like, hey, is that a really suspicious cloud hovering directly over me? Zeus doesn't pick lovers the way normal people do. There's no courting, no long walks along the beach, no polite invitations. No, his process is, shall we say, chaotic. He sees someone, usually mortal, usually beautiful, usually just trying to go about her day, and then boom, the whole natural world conspires. Maybe he becomes a white bull, maybe a swan, maybe a golden mist. Sometimes he doesn't even go that far. Sometimes he just shows up and says something vague like, "Fear not, I'm a god, boo," which is not a line that has aged well. The ancient Greeks weren't blind to the weirdness of all this. They painted it on vases, carved it into temples, told it to their children like bedtime stories, though honestly, they were some pretty rough bedtime choices. There's always this strange gap between how stunning the art looks and how absolutely unhinged the story behind it is. You see this elegant woman in flowing robes, and then you realise, oh, right, she's about to be turned into a cow and chased for a decade. Let's ease into the chaos with a gentle example. Clouds. Yes, clouds. Like the one Zeus supposedly transformed into to seduce Io. And in another myth, to fool Hera, he literally created a cloud version of Hera herself and tricked Ixion into, well, bad decisions. Zeus's whole weather-based disguise game was more like bad improv than divine romance. He could have gone with conversation. He went with thunderclaps and animal morphing. What's truly wild is how often he gets away with it. The gods around him barely blink. Hera, his wife, notices, obviously, she has a sharp eye for these things, and an even sharper sense of vengeance, but most of Olympus shrugs and moves on, because in their world, mortal lives were short, messy, and often disposable. The gods were busy being dramatic up on their cloud palace, while down below, women were getting turned into birds or running from snakes for the rest of their lives. Historians still argue about the purpose of these myths. Were they cautionary tales, justifications for the power of gods over mortals, or old fertility stories that got retconned into divine soap operas? No one agrees. There's even a fringe theory that all the animal disguises were originally sacred rituals turned weird over time. Like maybe a real-life bull cult slowly morphed into Zeus becomes a bull and kidnaps a princess, because someone got creative in their storytelling. But even the most academic minds admit there's something exhausting about the sheer volume of Zeus's romantic misadventures. Each one follows the same grim pattern. Mortal girl minding her business, Zeus appears as some supernatural nonsense, Hera gets involved, and then someone gets transformed into something unglamorous. The tragic loop continues, and no one learns anything. You're probably thinking, okay, but why? Why does Zeus do this over and over, and why does it always end in disaster? That's one of the ongoing scholarly debates. Some say it's a metaphor for the unpredictability of nature, or the tension between the mortal and divine. Others say it was all about divine legitimacy, that these unions created demigods and gave royal families an excuse to claim divine ancestry. Either way, it wasn't great for the people on the receiving end. Take a breath here. We're just at the beginning and already the skies are darkening. The clouds are getting a little too personal, and you're starting to understand that this isn't going to be a happily ever after kind of story. It's going to be mythologically inconvenient, occasionally absurd and usually very wet, because Zeus cannot resist a good rain motif. From here, we're going to slide gently into the story of Io. She's one of the earliest and saddest examples of Zeus takes an interest, life gets weird. But tonight, we're not rushing. We'll drift with the clouds, step softly into the fields where these stories began, and watch as things slowly unravel, like a dream you don't quite understand but can't wake up from either. Get cozy, it's only going to get weirder. You don't remember falling asleep in the meadow, but you wake up disoriented, blinking sunlight from your eyes. You stretch, expecting to feel grass against your skin, but instead there's an odd weight pulling at your limbs, a heaviness, and a pressure in your gut that doesn't belong. You try to sit up, but your hands don't move, because they're not hands. You've got hooves, and a tail, and verb fur, you've become a cow, and not even a metaphorical one. A literal, mooing, four-legged bovine. Welcome to Io's life, or rather what's left of it. Before the horns and hay, Io's a priestess. A mortal woman, clever, devout, and beautiful in that vague way that always spells trouble when a Greek god is involved. She serves Hera, of all deities, which in hindsight is like working front desk at a jealousy volcano. And yes, of course, Zeus notices her. Of course he does. She's radiant, full of grace, and tragically located within Zeus's line of sight. He doesn't try subtlety, or charm, or restraint. He does what Zeus always does. He appears in a mist, or a cloud, or maybe just as himself, depending on which version you hear. And poor Io, blameless, scared, wants no part of it. But rejecting a god is a complicated thing. You can't really say no, but saying yes isn't really a choice either. This is where the myths get uncomfortably quiet, where the lines blur between divine attention and total violation. The ancient poets gloss over the details. They usually do, but they agree on one thing Hera finds out, and she is not amused. Now this is where you might think Hera would direct her divine wrath at, say, her husband. Logical, right? But no. Hera has her own pattern. When Zeus strays, she punishes the women. Even the unwilling ones. Even the ones she's supposed to protect. Which is cruel, yes, but deeply baked into the structure of these myths. So Hera arrives on the scene, sees Io, and demands to know what Zeus is up to. Zeus, flailing for a cover story, pulls the oldest trick in the god book. He transforms Io into a cow right on the spot and pretends she's just some average, charming, totally unconnected heifer. "Oh, her," he says. "No, just a cow, not a seduced mortal at all. Moo." It's not a good lie, but Hera plays along. "Oh really," she says. "Then I'll just take her, as a gift, since she's just a normal cow and all." And so Io, freshly turned into livestock, is handed over like a party favour. Her former life? Gone. Her voice? Gone. Her human shape? Gone. What she gets instead is the world's creepiest babysitter. Argus Panoptes, a giant with 100 eyes, who watches her night and day. Half his eyes stay open even while he sleeps. It's not protection, it's surveillance. Constant, endless, unblinking surveillance. And if you're imagining Io standing there in a field covered in dust and confusion, trying to make sense of her new anatomy while being stared at by a literal wall of eyeballs, you're doing it right. You wander the fields, chewing grass, watching the horizon blur through bovine eyes, wondering what you did to deserve this. Occasionally you try to run, but Argus is always there, watching. The only moments of peace are when some of his eyes close for a second, like little shutters blinking out of sync. But even then, you know he's dreaming about watching you. There's actually a fringe academic debate about whether the myth of Io is a metaphor for an older fertility cult. Some scholars suggest the cow form isn't punishment, it's sacred transformation. Maybe she wasn't victimised so much as absorbed into a divine identity. Others argue it's just a patriarchal retelling of a goddess being reduced to an object of divine obsession. Either way, she ends up stuck with 4 stomachs and no escape plan. Her story doesn't even slow down here. No gentle fade to black. Just more wandering, more fear, more flies. Because yes, in case it wasn't mythologically miserable enough, Hera sends a gadfly to sting her constantly. Buzzing, biting, relentless. So Io the cow is forced to run. Across plains, mountains, rivers. Her hooves leave trails in the dirt that later cultures would name after her. The Ionian Sea, that's her. She leaves a wake of exhaustion across the ancient world. All this because she was beautiful and Zeus couldn't behave himself. What makes Io's story so quietly tragic is how little agency she has. She didn't fall in love, she didn't make a deal, she didn't climb a tower or slay a beast. She just existed, and that was enough to get swept into the chaos. The myths don't give her much of a voice, literally in fact. She can't speak, only moo, the ultimate silencing. And while we're here, can we just talk about the logistics of turning into a cow, the sudden rewiring of your entire nervous system? Your perspective lowers to the ground. Everything smells sharper. Your instincts change. You don't just think like a person anymore. You react like an animal. The horror of that, the slipping sense of self, might be the most disturbing part of all. You look in a pond and don't recognise your reflection. Eventually Io will find her way toward escape, but not yet. For now, she's just pacing in circles under Argus's weirdly alert gaze, swatting flies with her tail, and wondering if there's any version of this myth where she gets her life back. Spoiler, it's complicated. So you sigh, settle into the straw, the sun beats down on your back. You listen to the hum of flies, the distant bleating of goats, and the ever-present sound of 100 eyes, always watching. It's a long road ahead, and this is only the first chapter of Io's long, sad, restless journey through divine nonsense. It's the middle of the day, and Argus Panoptes hasn't blinked in hours. That's not even dramatic exaggeration. He literally doesn't need to. His 100 eyes take turns sleeping, some closed, some open, so that at no point is he ever truly off duty. Imagine being a cow cursed by the divine nonsense, and your entire existence is now being monitored by what amounts to a walking security system with more eyes than common sense. You try to graze, try to nap, try to think human thoughts like you used to, but there's always this towering figure in the corner of your vision, staring. Always staring. Argus is one of those characters in Greek myth who feels like he wandered in from a very different genre. He's not exactly evil, just unsettling. Some say he was born with all those eyes, a primordial being made for vigilance. Others think Hera created him specifically to be the ultimate guard dog. Either way, he's got one job. Watch Io. Don't let her escape. And definitely don't let Zeus sneak her back. Which is awkward, because Zeus is not exactly the type to let things go. Now, Zeus could have stormed in with lightning bolts, made a dramatic show of power, but that's not how he plays this one. No, this time he decides on stealth, a soft con job instead of brute force. Enter Hermes, messenger god, trickster, chaos specialist, and part-time flute enthusiast. If you need something stolen or watched or charmed, Hermes is your guy. So Zeus sends him down with a mission: get Io back, quietly. So here comes Hermes, strolling casually into the fields where Io stands trapped in cow form. He plays it cool, like he's just another traveller passing through. Argus eyes him warily. Well, some of his eyes do. Others are still scanning clouds or sheep or staring into the void, who knows? Hermes approaches with a calm smile and a lute or flute or pipe, depending on which storyteller you believe. Either way, it's an instrument, and he starts to play. Now imagine being Argus. You've got 100 eyes to manage, and suddenly this charming stranger is telling stories, plucking out lazy little tunes, leaning on a rock like he's not the god of deception himself. Hermes plays and talks and plays, and it's all very chill, until Argus starts to blink, slowly. One by one the eyes shut, a few at first, then more. The music hums in the air like warm honey, and eventually all 100 eyes close. That's Hermes' cue. He slips forward and kills Argus, swiftly, silently. No drama, just efficiency. One moment Io's under constant surveillance, the next, her watchdog is slumped in the grass, his unlinking legacy reduced to stillness. It's worth noting that Hermes is usually one of the more likeable gods. Funny, clever, rarely cruel, but this moment's a bit of a dark spot. Argus doesn't scream, doesn't fight, he just sleeps forever. Afterward, Hera mourns him in the only way she knows. She plucks his eyes, every single one, and places them on the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock. That's why peacocks have those shimmering eye-like spots. They're not decoration. They're grief. A little creepy memorial for her loyal, tragic watchman. Now Io might be free from Argus, but her troubles aren't over. Hera's not done. She sees what happened, sees her precious 100-eyed sentry fallen, and decides to crank the misery up a notch. That's when she sends the gadfly. Not just any fly, mind you. This thing is myth-level annoying, buzzing, stinging, relentless. It dives for Io's eyes, nips at her legs, drives her into a frenzy of motion. It's like Hera can't punish Zeus directly, so she just turns Io into a permanent moving target. You run, you don't know where, just forward, over fields, hills, rivers, past temples and cities that don't yet have names. Your hooves leave dents in future myth. The fly keeps following. There's no sleep, no rest, just movement. And as you run, the landscape changes. This isn't a local problem anymore, it's international. Io's hoof prints stretch across continents. She gallops across what will one day be called Thrace, then into Asia Minor, then across a narrow sea that later gets named after her, the Bosphorus, Cow's Crossing. This part of the myth turns almost dreamlike. Io is in constant motion, passing through lands, and leaving behind the shape of a story. Locals begin to carve her figure into stone. Cows start appearing in cult statues. Some people begin worshipping her outright, mistaking her suffering for sanctity. She's becoming myth before she even has a chance to breathe. There's a strange academic footnote here. Some scholars think the story of Io might be the faint echo of an ancient migration tale, twisted over centuries into divine punishment. A cow crossing a sea, a woman hunted across empires. It could be a metaphor for displacement, for exile, but in the myth, it's all just Hera's rage and Zeus's fallout. Eventually, after what feels like an eternity, Io stumbles into Egypt. Her hooves sink into Nile mud. The fly stops. Maybe it's bored. Maybe it's finally done. Either way, she collapses, trembling and half wild. And here, at long, long last, Zeus shows up again, not to apologise, not to fix things, but to turn her back into a human, as if that makes everything better. You'd think there would be a grand reunion, some sweet moment of redemption. But no, Zeus restores her form and then leaves. That's it. She's alone again, human again, surrounded by people who now think she's some kind of divine figure. Which, technically, she is. She'll stay in Egypt, marry a local king, and give birth to a son named Epaphus, who's supposedly Zeus's child. It's the quiet beginning of a new lineage. But none of that undoes the cow years. None of it erases Argus, or the gadfly, or the meadows soaked with confusion. Io gets a myth, sure, a legacy even, but not peace, not really. You, meanwhile, can still feel the phantom pull of hooves in your sleep, the thrum of wings overhead, the sting of punishment meant for someone else. And in the distance a peacock cries, tail glittering like the sky. The worst part of being a myth isn't the magic or the monsters, it's the fact that the story just keeps going, long after you're too tired to live in it anymore. Io thinks it's over once she's human again. She breathes real air, walks upright, hears her own voice come out of her mouth for the first time in what feels like centuries. And for a second she allows herself to believe this might be normal again. Spoiler, it isn't. Egypt welcomes her with open arms. The locals see her not as a cursed refugee, but as a divine visitor. She marries a king, Telephus, or maybe Telegonus, depending on which scribe couldn't remember which scroll they were copying, and settles into something that passes for peace. Her son, Epaphus, is born glowing with all the signs of divine lineage. The child of a mortal woman and a sky god, he is immediately fascinating to priests and kings alike. He's part god, part myth, and all political opportunity, and so begins a new kind of wandering, not through fields and mountains, but through lineages and legacies. Epaphus grows up with prophecy breathing down his neck. People are constantly bowing to him or plotting to use him. His mother watches nervously, remembering what it cost her to bring him into the world. He's handsome, sure, but so are a lot of cursed heroes. She's just hoping he doesn't sprout wings or horns or turn into a tree. Myth families tend to get complicated. And Epaphus does what many mythic sons do. He grows up to rule a land. Egypt, according to some stories. Others say he leaves, founds a city, becomes an ancestor to future heroes. Some versions connect him to Libya, claiming he fathers a daughter named Libya, who later gives rise to two of the most intense women in Greek myth, Belus and Agenor's lines, which include characters like Europa, Cadmus and Danaë. That's the thing about Greek myths. Once you're in the bloodline, you're in for generations of narrative weirdness. But Io? She fades into the background. She's not a hero, not a war starter or a city founder. She's just a woman who was turned into a cow, stung across continents, and dropped off in a land where she had to start over with a new name and a quiet sadness in her bones. The myths rarely check in on her again. Once her son is born, she's considered narratively complete, which is a myth-speak way of saying the story doesn't need her anymore. Still, the ancient world doesn't forget her entirely. Temples spring up in her honour. Some call her Isis, others blend her story with local legends. The line between Io the woman and Io the goddess blurs until even scholars can't tell which is which. Was she always meant to be divine? Or did generations of storytelling just refuse to let her be ordinary? There's even a strange little twist tucked into the folds of her myth, one that often gets skipped over. Some say that after her death, Hera forgives her, that the Queen of the Gods, in a rare soft moment, allows Io to live among the stars. She becomes a constellation, or maybe just a whisper in the sky. It's not much of a reward for being tormented by flies and eyeballs, but hey, it's Greek mythology. The bar is very low. Meanwhile, back on Mount Olympus, Zeus continues with his regular programming. Lightning bolts, cloud seating, probably thinking about his next clever disguise. Hera returns to her throne, still seething, still unrepentant. The gods do not apologise, they simply reshuffle. And if you're thinking, surely Io's story will serve as a lesson, right? Maybe warn the others, you'd be wrong. The mythic world does not learn. There's no prevention, no divine HR department, no Zeus intervention plan. Every woman is a new story waiting to be unfolded, rewrapped, and quietly ruined. Even now, lying in bed, listening to the hum of your fan, you can almost hear the hooves pounding across the ancient earth. You see flashes of white against the Nile's blue, the shimmer of sand curling around a woman who once had a name and now has only stories. She is running still across the dark fields of your imagination. It's easy to forget how strange all of this is, how surreal and sad and weirdly bureaucratic divine punishment can be. Hera doesn't kill her. She doesn't even torture her in a traditional way. No, she assigns her a life sentence of wandering. The myth doesn't need blood to leave a scar, it just needs distance. There's a quiet debate among mythologists about whether Io represents the victimization of women in myth, or the resilience of their survival. She doesn't fight back, but she doesn't die either. She moves forward, slowly, hoof by hoof, step by reluctant step. Maybe that's enough. And now, in your sleep-heavy mind, you wander too, across fields painted with twilight, past shepherds who don't look up, through valleys where the stars haven't yet decided on names. You imagine being watched, not maliciously but constantly, by eyes that do not close. You feel the sting of a myth that never quite lets go. Eventually you rest. Your breath deepens, the story grows fainter. But somewhere, far off in the mythic distance, a peacock shimmers, and a cow with the soul of a woman lifts her head toward a sky that never asked her permission. The thing about mythological bloodlines is they never really end, they just branch. Each person becomes a root or a symptom, feeding into newer, weirder stories like a tangled family tree no one wants to climb. So now that you've been emotionally rattled by Io's bovine misery, let's look at what becomes of her son, Epaphus. You'd think the offspring of a wandering cow woman and a thunder god might get a slightly more normal existence, but no, of course not, because this is still a Greek myth, and everyone's DNA is basically cursed papyrus. Epaphus grows up in Egypt, the land where his mother finally found peace, if we can even call it that. He's raised as royalty, maybe even worshipped as semi-divine, depending on how closely the local priesthood wants to suck up to Zeus that week. But even in the sun-baked halls of his Egyptian court, he knows he's not like the others. He's part god. It's a weird identity to carry. You get this vague sense of destiny baked into your personality like a flaw in your soul's pottery glaze. He's tall, clever, golden-skinned like sunlight on sand, and people either love him or plot against him, sometimes both at once. They say he can talk to animals, that storms avoid him, that he once survived a venomous snake bite just by glaring at the snake. Whether any of that's true is irrelevant. In myth, perception is reality. Eventually, Epaphus decides to leave. The stories get fuzzy here. Some say he found cities, Memphis or even parts of Libya. Others say he simply wanders, like his mother before him, looking for a place that feels like home. He doesn't know it yet, but he's carrying the mythic infection forward. He'll father daughters whose children will eventually start wars, slay monsters, and become parenthetical footnotes in someone else's tragedy. One of those daughters is Libya, possibly named after the land, or possibly the reason the land was named. Geography and myth get real cozy in ancient stories. Libya, depending on the version, will later give birth to two important dudes, Belus and Agenor. Belus becomes king of Egypt, linking the myths back around like an Ouroboros with family issues. Agenor goes on to father Europa and Cadmus, which means we're inching ever closer to bulls, labyrinths, and people getting turned into animals again. But before we chase that part of the bloodline, let's pause and consider Epaphus. What kind of man does a story like yours create? You grew up knowing your mother was turned into a cow, hunted across continents, stalked by 100 eyes and a vindictive goddess. You know your father is Zeus, the distant, stormy-eyed sky king who doesn't show up to birthday parties or send letters. That's a lot to carry emotionally. So maybe it makes sense that Epaphus is quieter than most mythic princes. He's not famous for battles, he doesn't kill any monsters, there are no dramatic deaths or heroic songs about him. He just exists, like a placeholder between one disaster and the next. Some scholars argue that he represents the blending of Greek and Egyptian cultures. Others say he was a borrowed figure from older traditions, plugged into the Zeus narrative like a borrowed USB god. Fringe theorists even argue that Epaphus is just a retcon of an Egyptian deity, Apis, the sacred bull, shoved into human form so the Greeks could make sense of regional mythology. There's something oddly peaceful about that. A mythic figure who doesn't blaze across the sky in a chariot, or hurl thunderbolts at titans, but instead quietly passes his story along like a genetic baton. Epaphus might not fight wars, but his children will. His descendants will start civilizations, cause collapses, and live in the background of every major myth from here on out. Still, you wonder what he dreams about at night. Does he see the shadow of a gadfly in his sleep? Hear the faint buzzing of his mother's past? Does he stand on the edge of the Nile and wonder if his destiny is his own, or just another continuation of Zeus's inability to leave mortals alone? There's a moment in one lesser-known version of the myth where Epaphus vanishes, just disappears. Poof. So some say Hera had him killed out of spite. Others claim he went looking for proof of his divine parentage and never came back. A few versions suggest he was taken to Olympus, hidden among the stars, watching his bloodline spiral downward like a snake eating itself. No one agrees. The story trails off like a half-finished sentence. It's a strange fate. Neither tragic nor triumphant, just unfinished. But maybe that's the most honest kind of myth. Not every character gets a full arc. Some are just bridges between one chaos and the next. So you lie there, imagining Epaphus walking across the Egyptian dunes, his sandals stirring the sand, the sun turning his skin to gold. He's not famous. He's not powerful. But he is necessary. A soft echo in a long, loud myth. The son of a cowwoman and a storm god, carrying all the silence his parents left behind. Somewhere in the distance a new story begins to stir. You can already hear the distant beat of wings. And we're not done with bulls yet. You're out for a quiet walk near the edge of a lake. One of those warm, lazy afternoons where the sky is smooth and empty, and you can almost forget you live in a myth. You're a queen, after all. You have responsibilities, decorum, robes that shimmer in the breeze. But today, you've taken off your sandals and let your feet sink into the cool mud by the water's edge. The reeds sway. Swans bob along the current like forgetful ghosts. It should be peaceful, but of course it isn't, because tonight we're stepping gently into the sad, weird story of Leda and the day she got swanned. Leda is another of those myth women with unfortunate luck and high cheekbones. A queen of Sparta, no less. Married to Tyndareus, a decent enough guy by Greek standards, which is saying very little. She probably thought she had it made. Palace life, royal duties, maybe a couple of kiddos who wouldn't get turned into birds or constellations. But somewhere up on Mount Olympus, Zeus was having one of his artistic moods. You know, the kind where he sees a beautiful mortal, and instead of writing a poem or sending flowers, he shapeshifts into an animal and drops into her life uninvited. Why a swan, though? That's the eternal, slightly baffled question. Out of all the animals Zeus could have picked, lion, eagle, golden retriever, he goes with swan. And not just any swan, a terrified one. A swan being chased by an eagle. A dramatic, flapping mess that crashes into Leda's arms at the lake's edge like a feathery damsel in distress. Some say she welcomes the swan, mistaking it for a divine bird in need of help. Others suggest she's swept up in enchantment. caught in that uncomfortable mythological grey zone between consent and fate. Either way, the encounter happens, and it's described in ways that range from poetic to aggressively vague. This is one of those myths where the ancient writers like to be just cryptic enough to leave you squinting. When it's over, Leda walks back to the palace, not entirely sure what's happened. She doesn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? Hi, yes, just cuddled a swan and now I'm pregnant. Isn't exactly dinner conversation. But that night she lays 2 eggs. Yes, eggs. Let that sink in. Your body, which is very human, now decides to express divine biology in the most confusing way possible. There's no graceful way to lay an egg as a person. None. This myth has 0 chill. And inside those eggs, children. Because why not? Out hatch 4 babies, 2 from each egg. The identities vary depending on the version, but the big names are always there. Helen, who will one day be of Troy, and Clytemnestra, future murderess of kings. And then the twins, Castor and Pollux, or Castor and Polydeuces if you're feeling Greek about it. The Dioscuri. They're inseparable, glorious, and destined for every kind of tragic brother scenario you can imagine. The great cosmic joke here is that no one's sure who fathered whom. Some versions say Zeus fathered Helen and Pollux. Others say Castor and Clytemnestra were the mortal kids of Tyndareus. It's a DNA mystery no one really wants to solve. But the result is a batch of demigod-adjacent offspring all tangled in a web of future myths, wars and identity issues. Just imagine family reunions. Oh hey, I'm your half-sister and technically descended from a swan. Want to share a crown? And poor Leda. She gets to raise them all. No one checks on her mental health, no support group for women who birthed mythic complications. She's remembered mostly as the vessel, the pretty lake walker, the one who accidentally became an accessory to divine shenanigans. And she lives the rest of her life under the enormous shadow of her children's destinies. Helen becomes the face that launches 1,000 ships. Clytemnestra becomes a walking Greek tragedy. Castor and Pollux become twin stars in the sky. And Leda becomes a footnote. There's actually a rare, fringy version of the myth that claims Leda was never seduced by Zeus at all. That the entire swan encounter was metaphor. Or maybe propaganda invented by rival kingdoms to undermine her family's legitimacy. Some theorists suggest it was an old fertility story about birds and divine birth, which the Greeks awkwardly literalized into swan intimacy. The idea that this myth was just a bad translation of a symbolic rite? Weirdly plausible. But most people remember the eggs. They always remember the eggs. One version of the story says that after laying the eggs, Leda hides them, ashamed and confused, hoping they'll disappear. They don't. They hatch, obviously, because nothing stays secret in Greek mythology for long. Her husband Tyndareus pretends not to notice that 2 of his children sparkle with divine aura and have slightly too perfect cheekbones. He raises them anyway. Good for him. Leda, meanwhile, watches her children grow into legends and probably wonders what would have happened if she'd walked the other direction that day at the lake, if she'd ignored the distressed swan, if she'd told Zeus to get lost in whatever bird language he was faking. But that's not how these stories work. You don't get off ramps in myth. You get carried forward, feather by feather, until the narrative no longer needs you. In some tellings, Leda dies quietly, in her sleep, long after her children have torn the world apart and each other with it. In others, she fades away, her story absorbed into the greater myths of Sparta. And in one haunting version, she transforms into a swan herself, because irony is the gods' favourite seasoning. Tonight, as you listen to the wind murmur against your window, imagine that lonely lake, the soft ripple of feathers in water. A woman kneeling on the muddy shore, reaching out to something beautiful and broken. And behind it all, a god watching, unseen, smiling in the clouds. You're standing in the palace nursery, surrounded by echoing stone walls and the distant murmur of courtiers, and you're holding an eggshell, not metaphorically, a literal, cracked, leathery shell that once contained a baby, or, more precisely, 2 babies. Helen and Pollux, glistening and healthy, already unnervingly beautiful, hatched just a few hours ago, and no one has the slightest idea how to react. Across the room, the other egg lies open too, smaller, duller, and containing Castor and Clytemnestra. 4 children, 2 eggs, one deeply confused household. You'd think someone would scream, but it's Sparta. People are weirdly calm about this kind of thing. Leda watches her new children with that tight, glassy look mothers get when their brains are sprinting through every question they're not allowed to ask out loud. Like, Should babies even come in eggs, or are they going to grow feathers? But she keeps quiet, royal dignity and all that. And Tyndareus, her long-suffering mortal husband, he says nothing either. It's not that he believes the swan story, it's just it's easier to pretend this is fine than to admit that your wife laid divine eggs after a lakeside walk. As the children grow, so do the problems. Castor and Pollux are as close as siblings can be. They train together, eat together, sneak off to do increasingly questionable heroic things together. They are known across the land as the Dioscuri, sons of Zeus, though depending on who's telling the story, only Pollux is truly divine. Castor, poor guy, is mortal. A twin with an expiration date. You can already feel the foreshadowing dripping from the rafters. Helen, meanwhile, is turning into a problem of her own. Not through any fault of her own, mind you. She's just too beautiful. The kind of beautiful that makes people nervous. Painfully, overwhelmingly symmetrical. As a child, she doesn't cause much trouble. She just sits in corners looking luminous, like she wandered in from a perfume commercial. But as she gets older, the stories around her start to bend and crack under the weight of what she will become. By the time she's a teenager, kings are showing up at the gates with offers of marriage. Tyndareus tries to delay them. He knows enough mythology to sense this won't end well. Eventually, he makes all the suitors swear an oath, a binding promise to protect whoever wins Helen's hand no matter what. Which seems like a clever move at the time, until it eventually becomes the whole reason the Trojan War happens. But that's later. Right now, Helen is just a glowing promise of future disaster, lounging in the sun while her brothers spar in the courtyard and her sister Clytemnestra sharpens daggers in secret. Ah yes, Clytemnestra, the forgotten egg twin, the least photogenic, but you'll want to keep an eye on her. She may not have divine shimmer, but she'll carve her name into myth with steel and fire. As Helen attracts kingdoms, Clytemnestra watches. She sees how beauty makes you vulnerable, how marriage is often just another name for losing control. She learns early on to play her own game. You won't hear much about her in this part of the myth, but trust me, her day is coming. And through it all, Leda just exists in the background. Still there, still watching her egg-born children rise like mythic sunbeams over the horizon. She doesn't interfere. That's not what mortal women in these stories get to do. They incubate heroes and then step aside. There's no retirement plan, no throne, no voice. Just echoes of feathers and the vague ache of a story that never quite belonged to her. There's a tiny quiet version of the story barely told where the eggs never hatch. Where Leda keeps them hidden in a linen basket, afraid of what they might become. She sings to them. She begs the gods to let her return to the lake, undo the moment, smooth the wrinkle in time that left her with divine offspring. But of course, no one answers. That's not how it works. In Greek mythology, the divine never apologizes. They just give you eggs and consequences. Scholars have spent centuries trying to interpret all this. Is it symbolic? Is Helen's beauty a metaphor for the seductive power of desire? Are the twins split between mortal and immortal to show the dual nature of man? Or was this just someone's ancient fever dream after a rough night of wine and bad omens? The debates go on, and none of them help poor Leda clean out the bassinet lined with feathers. One particularly quirky theory from a fringe classicist proposes that the eggs themselves were a symbol of cosmic balance, that Helen and Clytemnestra represent two halves of feminine myth, beauty and rage, that Castor and Pollux are the twin aspects of masculinity, glory and mortality. It's poetic, sure, but it doesn't change the fact that two of them are technically half birds, and no one seems to be dealing with that in a meaningful way. As the Dioscuri come of age, they start joining heroic quests, not leading them, at least not yet, but showing up in other people's stories like extremely competent guest stars. They're athletic, brave, and incredibly annoying to fight. One has divine immunity, the other's just really, really good with a sword. They go on to join Jason and the Argonauts, help steal some cattle, and in one particularly shady episode, kidnap two women already engaged to their cousins. Not all heroism ages well. And in the quiet corners of the palace, Leda watches the swirl of myth rise around her children. She recognises the pattern now, the way a god touches your life and then disappears, leaving only stories in his wake. No matter how beautiful or powerful they become, her children are still passengers in someone else's divine daydream. And she, once a queen, once a vessel for celestial weirdness, is just a side character with a complicated uterus. At night, when the palace sleeps, she walks the gardens barefoot, listening for the rustle of feathers. She doesn't know if she misses the swan, probably not. But part of her still remembers the lake, and the moment when everything was quiet. Before the eggs, before the names, before the stories took flight and never came back. You sit beside young Helen in the palace courtyard as the sun crawls across the white stones, watching the light slide off her skin like she's made of polished marble. She's quiet today, gazing at the horizon like she already knows it's going to come for her. She's maybe 13, maybe 15, no one's counting too closely in myths, and already men are composing odes about her eyelashes. Servants whisper behind her back like her beauty is catching. And in a way it is. Helen doesn't try to be luminous, she just is. And like anything too bright, people can't stop themselves from getting close, even if it burns. Her story you already know, or think you do. She'll become the woman whose face launches 1,000 ships, the spark that ignites the Trojan War, the pivot around which gods and kings wreck themselves for 10 long years. But that's later. Right now, she's just a girl trying to breathe, trying to make it through another day of being admired like a statue instead of seen like a person. It starts even earlier than you'd expect. When she's still a child, she's abducted by Theseus. Yes, that Theseus. Hero of Athens, slayer of the Minotaur, and part-time kidnapper, apparently. He and his buddy Pirithous decide they deserve divine wives, because of course they do, and they settle on Persephone for Pirithous and Helen for Theseus. One is already in the underworld, so naturally they go with the easier target first. So one day, while Helen's outside, maybe picking flowers like doomed mythic girls always do, Theseus snatches her up and spirits her off to Attica. Some versions say she's 12, some say 10, all of them agree it is bad. He hides her with his mother, Aethra, and leaves her there while he runs off to try his luck in Hades, which is a lot like robbing a bank and then going to Disneyland before the cops show up. The rescue doesn't take long. Helen's brothers, Castor and Pollux, storm into Attica like a mythic SWAT team, tear the place apart, retrieve their sister, and drag Aethra back to Sparta as a hostage or a handmaiden, depending on who's telling the story. Helen comes back unharmed, supposedly, but something inside her shifts. She's seen what happens when men decide they're entitled to her, and it won't be the last time. After that, the suitors start lining up, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Princes, warlords, demigods, even a few men whose only real claim is ambition wrapped in good armour. And Helen, still barely old enough to vote by modern standards, is expected to choose, or rather, to be chosen. Tyndareus, her mortal father, bless his royal heart, sees disaster brewing. So he gets clever. He makes the suitors swear an oath. Whoever wins Helen's hand, the rest must protect that marriage no matter what. A binding agreement, no drama, no blood feuds. Just honour. Everyone agrees. Because Helen's beauty isn't just a face, it's currency, destiny, a geopolitical event waiting to happen. The suitors know she'll be the crown jewel of any kingdom, the one who births future kings, elevates cities, inspires poets. None of them think about what she wants. That's not how this works. She's more symbol than human now. Odysseus is there, by the way. Sneaky even then. He knows he has no chance with Helen, so he negotiates for Penelope instead. Classic move, calculated, quiet, already playing chess while the others are still measuring swords. Helen ends up with Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon. Not the worst choice, honestly. He's solid, rich, good with a spear. They marry, have a daughter named Hermione, yes, before she was cool, and settle into Spartan royal life. But there's always this tension. Helen wears her crown like it's too heavy. She smiles like it cost her something. She rules, but you can tell her heart is elsewhere, tucked behind the bars of myth waiting to escape. Then comes Paris. You know this part, right? Golden apple, judgment of the gods, goddesses fighting over most beautiful, Paris being roped in to decide, Aphrodite promising him the love of the world's most beautiful woman. The prize is Helen, already married, already tired. And once Paris sees her, the wheels of fate start turning like clockwork with a grudge. Some stories say Helen goes willingly, that she's enchanted, that Aphrodite warps her heart, fills her with longing, and she sails off to Troy as if hypnotized. Others say Paris takes her by force, that she's spirited away like the girl in the meadow again, reliving the Theseus nightmare on a larger scale. Still others whisper that she hated Sparta, hated Menelaus, and ran, that the war was her way out. There's no agreement. That's the point. Helen becomes a blank screen onto which every storyteller projects their favourite version of the eternal feminine dilemma. Did she choose or was she chosen? Was she traitor, victim, or both? But none of those voices ask her what she wanted. They never do. The scholarly debates are endless. Feminist readings reclaim her. Traditional ones blame her. Fringe theorists argue she never went to Troy at all, that it was a phantom sent by the gods while the real Helen hid out in Egypt, sipping wine and waiting for the drama to cool off. It's a neat theory, that one. Very multiverse of madness, with fewer monsters and more olive oil. But let's go back, just for a moment, to the Helen before all that. Before the ships. Before the war. Before the judgment. She's sitting in a sunbeam, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. She hears the whispers. She feels the weight. And in her eyes, there's no fire yet. Just the dull shimmer of someone who knows her life has already been written by people who never bothered to ask for her input. At night, Helen walks the halls of the palace barefoot, the marble cold beneath her skin, her reflection multiplying in the polished columns like a goddess haunting herself. She hears the wind outside, the sea beyond it, and wonders what shape her story will take. Swan daughter, war prize, queen, mirage, a girl born from an egg who never really got to crack her own shell. The first thing you need to know about Nemesis is that she's not here to smile, soothe, or wrap you in warm, divine forgiveness. She is the goddess of retribution, the embodiment of divine balance, and she carries a cosmic clipboard with your name on it. Not the flashy kind of punishment, like thunderbolts or dramatic plagues. Nemesis is slow, inevitable justice. You slip up, you forget your place, you get too lucky for too long, she'll be there. Not immediately, but eventually, with a look that says, I'm not mad, I'm just cosmically disappointed. And unfortunately for Zeus, justice is not immune to charm. He sees Nemesis, and he wants her. Of course he does. It's textbook at this point. Zeus wanting the one woman who actively does not want him. But Nemesis isn't like the mortals he usually targets. She's not impressed by clouds, swans, golden showers, or any of the usual weather-based nonsense. She's not flattered. She's busy. She's also not stupid. She knows exactly what happens to the women Zeus chases. She's literally in charge of making sure consequences happen. So she runs. And when a goddess runs, it's not a light jog around Olympus. She shapeshifts. She speeds across the world. She becomes a fish, a deer, a bee, a lioness. Every animal, every form, just to get away from the Sky King's relentless pursuit. But Zeus, being Zeus, doesn't stop. He matches her shape for shape, sprint for sprint. He's the world's most inappropriate shape-shifting boyfriend. And finally, when Nemesis turns into a goose and flies to the edge of the world, thinking surely he won't follow her now, Zeus becomes a swan and does just that. Yes, you heard correctly. This is the second swan story. Different woman, different situation, same bad feathered choices. Some versions say he catches her in Thrace. Others say she escapes but lays an egg from the encounter. Either way, the result is familiar. An egg appears, shimmering with divine weirdness. Nemesis, in her swan form or after it, doesn't want the thing. She gives it away. In some stories it ends up with a shepherd. In others a queen, Leda, finds it nestled in a grove and takes it home. And now you see the connection, right? That maybe Helen wasn't just Leda's daughter. That maybe Leda only incubated something older, something that came from Nemesis and Zeus in bird form. The myth doubles back on itself, questioning everything you thought you understood. Who is Helen really? Mortal? Divine? Justice incarnate? Carnate? A forgotten egg dropped by a fleeing goddess? It's a minor myth, this Nemesis one. Not told often, mostly a footnote in dusty texts and confusing genealogies, but it pulses beneath Helen's story like a quiet drumbeat. If Nemesis is her true mother, it changes everything. It means Helen was never just beautiful. She was born from vengeance, from refusal, from a chase that never should have happened. She becomes not just a prize, but a correction. Think about it. A child born of retribution, raised as a queen, sent to be the downfall of men who thought they could own her. Maybe the Trojan War wasn't about desire or love at all. Maybe it was an ancient boomerang of justice finally circling back, divine balancing act wrapped in perfect cheekbones and tragic poetry. There's a fringe group of scholars, definitely on the edges of respectability, who lean all the way into this. They claim Helen was never meant to be loved, but feared. That every suitor, every king, every poet who gazed at her was just another name on Nemesis's revenge list, that she was the final form of divine accountability, and the war was her prophecy, not her punishment. It's a compelling theory, especially when you consider how rarely Helen suffers real consequences. She doesn't die at Troy. She's not punished like other mythic women. She returns home to Menelaus, her reputation weirdly intact. She lives. In some versions, she becomes a goddess. In others, she drifts off to the Isles of the Blessed, sipping nectar and watching the ruins of her story fade behind her. That kind of ending is rare, suspicious even. But let's step back to Nemesis herself. You won't find temples to her filled with flowers. People don't pray to her unless they're absolutely desperate or very, very guilty. She's the god you call when everything's gone sideways and you need the universe to press the reset button. She walks alone. She carries a measuring rod, a bridle, sometimes a sword. And she doesn't care about your excuses. In the myths, her only weakness is being pursued. Not in the romantic sense, but in the "why won't this guy leave me alone" kind of way, which is depressingly relatable. You imagine her now standing on a cliff's edge, wings spread, eyes narrowed. The swan is gone, the egg is gone, but the aftermath is just beginning. Somewhere a war is brewing, somewhere else a girl is brushing her hair in a palace hallway, unaware of the forces that made her. And in the sky above it all, Nemesis watches, waiting to see if the balance will hold, or if the scale will tip again. Tonight you turn your face toward the stars and wonder how many of them are gods watching their old mistakes unfold. Maybe Nemesis is still up there, keeping track. Maybe she never stopped. Maybe Helen, whether daughter or egg or weapon, was only ever part of the ledger. And maybe the reason the story still resonates is because we all know what it's like to run, or to be chased, or to become something we didn't ask to be, just because someone more powerful decided it was time. The beach is warm beneath your feet, the sand soft and the sea impossibly calm. You're lying on a woven blanket, eating grapes, laughing with your friends, and trying, just for once, not to worry about your royal duties. You're Europa, a Phoenician princess, daughter of King Agenor, and for once your day is just easy. No dreams, no omens, no strange birds watching you from treetops. Just the lapping of the waves and the occasional breeze off the Mediterranean. You stretch, tuck a flower behind your ear, and feel your worries drift out to sea. And then a bull shows up. Not just any bull, though. This one is snow white, perfectly shaped, with eyes so gentle it feels like it's seen the beginning of the world. It steps onto the beach like it belongs there, like it's here on vacation too. Your friends stare, you stare, no one runs, because the bull doesn't growl or charge. It kneels politely as if to say, "Hello, I am very much not a god in disguise, definitely just a regular adorable bovine." Zeus is back at it, of course. By now you've noticed the pattern. Woman minds her business, Zeus spots her, and within 10 minutes he's a swan or a cloud, or in this case a designer bull. You'd think the king of the gods would have better hobbies, or at least a therapist. But no, this is what he does. And Europa? She's just today's tragic instalment. The bull nudges her gently, nuzzles her hand, and after a while she laughs and climbs onto its back. Maybe it's just curiosity. Maybe she wants to impress her friends. Maybe the gods nudged her into it without her realizing. But whatever the reason, the moment she settles onto his back, the beach begins to shrink. The bull turns, takes a step into the sea, then another, then another. By the time Europa realizes what's happening, the water's up to her knees, and they're not stopping. The bull's hooves don't sink, they skim. He's walking on waves, and the shoreline is a distant blur. She doesn't scream. That part always gets skipped in the retellings. But let's be honest, there had to be screaming, or at least stunned silence, because one second you're tanning on the beach and the next you're being ferried across the Mediterranean on the back of a mythological livestock abduction. Some versions say he talks to her mid-ocean, that he reveals himself with a polite booming, "Surprise! I'm Zeus!" as the sea gods part the waters like a bridal procession. Others claim she doesn't realize it's him until much later, after the island, after the children, after the, "Hey, by the way, I'm the literal god of thunder" bomb gets casually dropped over wine and olives. Either way, she ends up in Crete. It's beautiful, fertile, bright. Zeus pulls out all the stops, he builds her a palace, gives her golden jewellery, probably a few talking birds. He tells her she'll be queen here. She'll have his children. They'll rule this island together. But what he doesn't say is that he'll leave the moment the sparkle wears off. And sure enough, as soon as Europa gives birth to 3 sons, Minos, Rhadamanthus and Sarpedon, Zeus is gone. Just like that. No goodbye, no divorce paperwork. He bounces back to Olympus like a bad ex with boundary issues. He's done this before, he'll do it again. Europa, now a mother of gods and kings, doesn't cry. Or maybe she does, but history doesn't record it. Instead, she rules. She raises her sons. She builds a life in the ruins of her old one. And if she ever misses Phoenicia, the warm stone halls of her father's palace, the slow red sunsets over the sea, she doesn't say. She has too much to do. One of her sons, Minos, will go on to become a famous, terrifying king, the kind who builds labyrinths and demands sacrifices. Another will become a judge of the dead. But that's coming later. For now, Europa just watches them grow. There's a strange version of the myth that says the bull never stopped walking, that he carried her through the sea not to Crete but into the stars, that Europa herself became a constellation, or a moon, or some faint celestial name that astronomers now assign to satellites and spacecraft without realising she was once a girl stolen from a beach. Scholars still debate what Europa represents. Some say she's a symbol of the East meeting the West, a Phoenician woman swept into Greek culture and made into myth. Others think she was originally a fertility goddess, downgraded into a mortal by a culture that didn't like powerful women sticking around. And then there's the academic fringe, the ones who say the bull wasn't Zeus at all, but an ancient trade route, a metaphor, or even a hallucination brought on by heatstroke and political propaganda. But in all versions, she never goes back. That's what makes her story linger. She doesn't return to her homeland. She doesn't become a tragic footnote like Io or Leda. She stays, builds, mothers, shapes the next generation of myth. And maybe, just maybe, on quiet nights, she walks to the edge of the Cretan shore and stares out across the water, watching for a ripple. Not hoping for Zeus, not anymore. Just remembering the feeling of waves under hoof. The strange, gentle bull who wasn't really a bull, and the moment her life veered into legend. Out there, somewhere in the dark sea, the path she took is still invisible but real. A god's wake, a stolen girl, a kingdom born not from war, but from wandering. You wake up on Crete, not as a visitor, not as a prisoner, but as something awkwardly in between. There's salt in your hair, unfamiliar stars overhead, and the lingering scent of a god who has already vanished. You are Europa, newly crowned queen of a land you didn't choose, surrounded by people who now look to you for leadership like it was your idea to ride across the sea on a bull. Zeus has done his usual thing, shown up, rearranged your life without permission, left behind 3 kids and a questionable origin story, and now he's gone. Olympus is quiet. You're stuck with the consequences. The people of Crete don't ask questions. They welcome you with the kind of calm, resigned hospitality that suggests this isn't their first divine surprise. You're royal, they're polite, and after a few awkward meals and public ceremonies you begin to settle in. You marry a local nobleman, a Styrian, or maybe he's just a powerful ally who adopts your sons as his heirs. Either way, he helps you govern the island while the boys grow up, and Zeus remains a distant thundercloud on the horizon. Your sons are the real legacy. There's Minos, who has Zeus's stubborn jaw and none of his charm. He's serious, ambitious, and watches the world like he's already planning how to conquer it. Rhadamanthus is softer, more thoughtful, the kind of kid who gets into debates about justice before he's even tall enough to reach a lyre. And Sarpedon, well, he's wild. Beautiful, impulsive, maybe a little too interested in the gods who left you behind. 3 boys, 3 futures, all orbiting the silence where their father should be. Minos is the one who rises first. As he gets older, he decides Crete isn't enough. He wants to rule, not just by inheritance, but with divine legitimacy. So he announces that the gods will prove his right to the throne. How? By sending a sign, a miracle, something impressive and totally non-negotiable. Everyone shrugs and waits. After all, Zeus is his father. He's probably got some miracle tokens stashed away for moments like this. Sure enough, from the sea comes a snow-white bull. It emerges from the surf like some kind of ocean ghost, perfect and silent, and walks calmly onto the shore like it's responding to an appointment. The people gasp. The priest nods solemnly. Minos accepts it with smug gratitude and immediately claims the throne. The bull becomes his royal symbol, his divine endorsement. But this is where things take a sharp turn, because Minos was supposed to sacrifice that bull to Poseidon, the sea god. That was the deal. Divine bull throne, but in exchange you kill the bull to honour the god who sent it. Logical in its own terrible way, but Minos takes one look at this magnificent creature and says, actually no. He keeps it, too beautiful to waste, too symbolic to burn, so he substitutes another bull and hopes no one notices. Poseidon notices, and Poseidon does not play around. He doesn't strike Minos down immediately, doesn't flood the island or throw lightning. Instead, he takes a more poetic route. He curses Minos' wife, Pasiphae, with an unnatural, overwhelming desire for the very bull her husband refused to sacrifice, and yes, that's exactly as bad as it sounds. The bull, remember, is divine. It's still glowing with that sacred aura. And Pasiphae, like so many women in these stories, is punished not for her own mistake, but for her husband's arrogance. The story gets worse. Pasiphae, desperate and shamed, turns to Daedalus, the island's resident genius inventor. And Daedalus, like every engineer with too much talent and not enough morality, builds her a contraption. A hollow wooden cow, lifelike and wheeled, in which Pasiphae can hide herself and interact with the bull. You pause here because even in myth, some things should require a content warning. But yes, it happens. Poseidon's curse completes its awful arc. From this union, if we can call it that, Pasiphae gives birth to a child, not a regular child, not even a demigod, but the Minotaur, half man, half bull, all nightmare. The creature is unnamed at first, just a monstrous baby with horns and unnatural hunger. Minos is horrified. He refuses to kill it, though. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. So instead, he has Daedalus build a labyrinth beneath the palace, an impossible maze of stone and shadow, and locks the Minotaur inside. And Europa? She's not in this part of the story. Her chapter has already faded. The myth moves on without her, like it always does with mortal women who were useful once and inconvenient now. But if you look closely, you can still feel her presence echoing through Crete. Her name lives on in the continent that will eventually claim her legend. Her blood flows through kings and monsters alike. She is the root of the tree that grows twisted and tall. Some say Europa died peacefully. Others claim she was turned into a goddess. There's even a version where Zeus, feeling nostalgic or guilty, or maybe just bored, turns her into a star. But she never returns to Phoenicia. Her old homeland fades behind her like a half-remembered dream. She stays on Crete, in the stone palaces and sea breeze, buried in the footnotes of the myth she accidentally started. And so, on a warm Cretan night, you might hear the laughter of children echo through the olive groves, or the low, distant sound of hoofbeats beneath the palace, or the rustling wings of a god flying away again before anyone can ask him to clean up the mess he left behind. Europa sleeps now, her crown gathering dust, her sons turning into legends, and beneath the island, the Minotaur paces in the dark, a monument to broken promises and the quiet ruin that follows even the most beautiful beginnings. You wake in darkness, stone beneath your feet, the air thick and stale, and the distant sound of hooves echoing through endless corridors. You are not Europa anymore, not even close. You're someone else entirely now. Maybe Theseus, maybe a nervous sacrificial tribute, maybe just a drifting observer of myth's weirder corners. But one thing is certain, you're inside the labyrinth. Welcome to the legacy of Minos, the second-hand fallout of a divine beach date gone wildly off the rails. Let's rewind just a little. Minos, son of Europa and Zeus, now rules Crete with the kind of confidence only a half-god with dad issues can muster. He's powerful, organised, and has a thing for double-headed axes and complicated architecture. But under his glittering palace lies a shame he can't destroy. The Minotaur, his stepson, or son, or half-brother. The family tree is already hopelessly tangled. The point is, the Minotaur is a walking reminder that you can't cheat a god without paying a cosmic tax. The creature itself is complicated, half man, half bull, with the worst instincts of both. He's not just a monster, he's a mythic paradox, the noble body of a man, the hunger of a beast, the mind somewhere in between. Most people think of the Minotaur as pure terror, horns and snarling and blood-streaked walls. But in some old versions, he cries. In others, he speaks. He paces the labyrinth not out of fury but confusion, born into a body no one wanted. imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. It's less horror movie, more existential performance art really. And then there's the labyrinth itself, Daedalus's masterpiece. Not just a maze, but a shifting, humming puzzle of corridors so confusing that even the walls seem unsure of their purpose. No one escapes, not even Daedalus, eventually. It's a physical metaphor for every god-induced complication ever. A beautiful trap with no clean way out. To make things worse, Minos starts using the place like a trash bin for his political problems. After defeating Athens in a war, because someone murdered his son Androgeus at the Panathenaic Games, and Minos is nothing if not petty, he demands regular tribute. 7 young men and 7 young women sent from Athens every 9 years to be devoured by the Minotaur. It's part punishment, part deterrent, and 100% traumatizing. You can imagine the shipping logistics alone. Please pack your best child warriors in a labelled crate. Include snacks. So naturally enter Theseus. Athens' golden boy, slayer of robbers and accidental cousin of Hercules, shows up and volunteers as tribute. Not out of humility, but because he wants to kill the Minotaur and end the cycle of fear. It's brave, sure, but also just the kind of theatrical nonsense he's known for. He sails to Crete like it's a school trip and immediately charms Ariadne, Minos' daughter, because no Greek hero can go 5 minutes without a romantic subplot. Ariadne, to her credit, sees in Theseus not just a handsome rebel, but a way out, of Crete, of her father's house, of her own myth. She gives him a ball of thread, a literal lifeline, so he can find his way back out of the labyrinth after slaying the Minotaur. Which is exactly what happens. Theseus charges in, navigates the darkness, finds the creature and kills it. And whether the Minotaur fights back like a beast or simply lets it happen, depends on the version. In some it's a brutal, triumphant clash, in others it's closer to mercy than murder. And just like that, the monster is gone. The maze is quiet. Theseus leaves, dragging a trail of thread behind him, Ariadne at his side, sailing off into what should be the happy ending. But this is a Greek myth, and nobody gets a happy ending. Theseus abandons Ariadne on the island of Naxos. Maybe because the gods told him to, maybe because he got bored, maybe because he's just a jerk. She wakes alone, barefoot on the shore, staring at an empty sea. Later, Dionysus, the party god of all people, will find her or marry her and make her immortal. But in that moment, she's just one more woman left behind by a man with a destiny. As for the labyrinth, it doesn't vanish. Its bones remain beneath Crete, under the crumbling palace of Knossos. Daedalus is imprisoned by Minos, punished for helping Ariadne betray him. He'll eventually escape with wings made of wax and feathers, flying too close to the sun with his son Icarus in tow, and we all know how that ends. Spoiler. Poorly, and with a splash. The Minotaur doesn't get a tomb, he doesn't get a name. He's buried in story, remembered only as a beast, even though his story is one of being caged, not cruel. There's an old theory that he wasn't meant to be a villain at all, just the living consequence of broken oaths and god-level pettiness. A creature born because no one kept their promises, not Poseidon, not Minos, not even Zeus, who started this all by pretending to be a really charming bull. There are scholars who argue the whole Minotaur myth is just a dramatised echo of ancient Minoan rituals, that the labyrinth was real, not magical, just an elaborate palace complex that confused early Greeks, that the bull-headed man was a symbol of divine kingship, of seasonal sacrifice, of nature's chaos, trying to be tamed. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, as it always is in myth. You stand in the silence of the story's end, in the empty labyrinth, feeling the weight of all that was trapped here. A mother cursed, a child deformed, a king corrupted, a hero who left behind more heartbreak than glory. And deep beneath it all, stone corridors twist into infinity, still echoing with footsteps that have never found a way out. You're underground again, but this time there's no monster, no labyrinth, no doomed tributes. Just a young woman locked in a room she never asked to be in, staring up through a skylight she didn't choose, and trying very hard not to be afraid of weather. This is Danaë's story, and it starts in a chamber with bronze walls, a stone floor and no visible exit. You'd think this was the setup for some epic escape tale, but no. Danaë isn't a hero or a villain or even a rebel. She's a daughter. And that's the whole problem. Her father, King Acrisius of Argos, had the kind of paranoia that only really blossoms when oracles get involved. He went to the oracle at Delphi asking for a son, and instead he got a prophecy. You will not have a son, but your daughter will, and that son will kill you. Which is not great feedback to receive, especially if you're the kind of guy who takes destiny way too personally. So Acrisius reacts in the most unhinged and completely mythological way possible. He locks his daughter in a tower. Actually, not even a tower. It's more like a glorified bronze panic room buried under the palace, sealed from all sides except a grated skylight for air and maybe some moonlight. The logic here is, if Danaë never meets anyone, she'll never have a son. Problem solved, right? Except Acrisius seems to forget one minor detail. The gods don't care about locks, or consent, or architectural planning. Zeus once again notices a beautiful woman minding her business, and once again he decides to intervene, not as an animal this time or a charming disguise, but as something even more absurd, weather, specifically a golden rain. Yep, he doesn't enter as a man or a swan, he turns into literal gold, glittering droplets, liquid sunlight, and he pours down through the skylight into her locked chamber and onto Danaë. The myths don't say exactly how that worked, mechanically speaking, and you really don't want to think about it too hard. It's more disturbing the longer you linger, but the result is familiar. Danaë becomes pregnant. For a while she keeps it a secret. You can picture her, pacing in her sealed bronze room, wondering what's happening to her body, what she's going to tell her father, whether it's possible to be gaslit by the weather. Eventually, of course, Acrisius finds out. He hears a baby crying or sees her glowing with maternal divinity and immediately freaks out. And again, he chooses violence over therapy. He doesn't kill her, he's still slightly afraid of the gods, but he does something arguably worse. He locks Danaë and her infant son inside a wooden chest and throws them into the sea. Just chucks them into the waves like divine leftovers. He figures, if the gods want them alive, they'll survive. If not, problem solved. This happens a lot in myth. Oceaner's exile, mother and child drifting on a wooden box, hoping not to drown. You can almost hear the waves slapping against the sides, the creaking of waterlogged wood, Danaë clutching her baby and whispering lullabies into the storm. Her son, by the way, is Perseus. Yes, that Perseus, the one with the winged sandals and the Medusa head. But right now he's just a squishy golden-skinned infant, born from rain and locked in a box with his mother. They drift for days, maybe weeks, no food, no clear destination, but eventually the chest washes ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys finds them. He opens the chest, sees Danaë and Perseus blinking at the sunlight, and instead of running away or calling the local authorities, he brings them home, raises them, protects them. This is one of those rare myth moments where someone does the right thing without needing to be cursed or threatened. So Danaë settles into island life. It's quiet, not royal but peaceful. Her son grows stronger every day, chasing goats and skipping rocks, blissfully unaware that he's technically the product of divine rain and a paranoid prophecy. But peace never lasts long in myth, and sure enough trouble comes wearing a crown. Polydectes, the king of Seriphos and brother of good old Dictys, notices Danaë. And if we've learned anything by now, it's that beautiful women in Greek mythology do not get left alone. Polydectes wants to marry her. Danaë says no, again and again, but Polydectes isn't used to being told no, so he comes up with a plan. He'll get rid of Perseus. If the kid's gone, the mother becomes vulnerable. He pretends he's getting married to someone else, and demands that everyone on the island bring him a wedding gift. Perseus, young and proud and poor, can't afford anything fancy, so Polydectes smiles and says, "No worries, just bring me the head of Medusa." Oh, sure. You know, that Medusa. The snake-haired Gorgon who turns people to stone with a glance. Totally reasonable errand for a teenager. Danaë watches her son sail away, carrying the weight of a death trap disguised as a quest. She doesn't stop him, because in myth, mothers don't get to stop heroes. They only get to wait, to pray, to stand at the shore and wonder if the ocean will ever bring him back. And here's the thing. She never wanted any of this. Not the prophecy, not the rain, not the sea. Danaë was just a woman trying to live in a world that punishes beauty, that locks women up for someone else's fear. She didn't ask to become a mother to a hero. She just wanted to be safe, free, maybe even a little bit happy. There's a version of the myth where Danaë never leaves Seriphos, where she watches her son return Medusa's head in hand, triumphant, where Perseus turns Polydectes to stone and frees his mother once and for all. But there's no great homecoming, no crown returned. Danaë doesn't become queen again. She lives quietly, a woman once locked in bronze, then in a box, now in the margins of her son's glory. You picture her, years later, sitting on a stone wall overlooking the sea, her hair streaked with grey, watching the waves roll in. The same sea that almost killed her. The same sea that gave her a second chance. She watches her son laughing with Dictys, a Gorgon's head buried deep in some temple, and wonders if it's finally over. It never really is. The thing about Acrisius is that he doesn't learn. You'd think, after locking his daughter in a sealed bronze chamber, watching her somehow still end up pregnant via celestial weather, and hurling her into the ocean in a wooden box, and watching her survive all that, he might stop and reconsider his life choices. But no, he's a king, and kings in Greek myth tend to double down on bad ideas with a kind of unstoppable confidence, like the world owes them correctness. Back in Argos, Acrisius goes about his business pretending that the ocean solved his daughter problem. Danaë and the infant Perseus, probably fish food by now. He sleeps better at night with that assumption tucked into his pillow. But the gods, as always, are not done with him, especially when there's a prophecy on the line. And the thing about prophecies is that they don't expire. They just wait. Meanwhile, across the sea on the quiet little island of Seriphos, Perseus is growing up. He's tall now, sharp-eyed and bronze-skinned from the sun, and his arms are starting to carry the weight of something heavier than fishing nets. Raised by Dictys, the kindly fisherman who found them washed ashore, Perseus has a strong moral compass and absolutely no sense of how to avoid dangerous quests, which is why when King Polydectes tries to send him to die by asking for Medusa's head, Perseus just shrugs and says, "Sure." Danaë watches this unfold in horror. She can see through the king's manipulations. She knows what this really is, a way to separate her from her son. Again. She already lost him once to the ocean, and now here he is, barely grown, ready to throw himself at a Gorgon just because a smug little tyrant didn't like being told no. There's a version of the myth where Danaë tries to intervene, goes to Polydectes and begs him to reconsider, even offers herself in place of her son. Predictably, it doesn't work. Power doesn't bargain with desperation, and so Perseus sails off in pursuit of a monster, while Danaë is left behind in a palace that feels like a cage. And here's where we zoom out, because the heart of this part of the story isn't just about Danaë or Perseus. It's about Acrisius, still tucked away in Argos, blissfully unaware that the very grandchild he tried to erase is now gaining divine tools and monster-slaying experience. Fate, you see, loves dramatic irony. After Perseus beheads Medusa, and we'll get to that properly later, he returns to Seriphos just in time to stop Polydectes from forcing Danaë into marriage. The scene is straight out of a Greek soap opera. Angry hero son storms into the palace, Gorgon head in their hand, and turns the king to stone mid-ultimatum. Boom, justice, myth style. Danaë is finally free. No more locked rooms, no more boxes, no more threats. Perseus doesn't stay on Seriphos, though. Like all mythic sons, he eventually sets out to find his roots. That means travelling back to Argos, the very city his grandfather rules, the one that once declared him too dangerous to live. Acrisius, naturally, is terrified. He hears rumours that Danaë and her divine child survived, that the boy is no longer a boy, but a man carrying prophecy in his shadow. So he does what cowards do. He runs. Yes, the king who tried to outrun fate ends up literally running from it. He leaves Argos behind, hoping that distance will break destiny's grip. But destiny, in Greek mythology, is annoyingly good at logistics. Now, here's where the myth gets oddly anticlimactic and also kind of funny, if you're into dark comedy. Perseus travels to Larissa, where a set of funeral games are being held. Athletic competitions were the ancient Greek equivalent of reality shows crossed with state funerals, deeply competitive, highly dramatic, and full of emotionally loaded discus throwing. Perseus, being the kind of guy who probably looks great in a toga and doesn't skip leg day, enters the games. He throws a discus. The discus flies a little too far, and in the crowd, there's an old man trying to keep a low profile. The discus strikes him. He dies instantly. That man, Acrisius. His grandfather. Prophecy fulfilled. No revenge, no confrontation, no long-awaited reckoning, just an accidental death by flying object. Perseus doesn't even recognise him until it's over. It's almost absurd the way fate pulls it off. Quiet, sudden, and painfully on the nose. Scholars have debated this ending for centuries. Some say it's a perfect metaphor for how fate works in Greek myth. No matter how much you plan, hide, or overthink, the future will whack you on the head anyway. Others argue it's a storytelling shortcut, the mythological equivalent of a shrug. He dies because, well, the prophecy said so. Next story. There's a fringe theory that Acrisius isn't dead, that the whole discus incident was symbolic, and that he actually went into hiding and lived under a different name. But that's wishful thinking, the myth is clear, prophecy 1, human scheme 0. And Danaë? Her story ends here. Quietly. She never gets revenge. She never returns to Argos to take back her throne or confront her father's ghost. Her legacy isn't in power or glory, it's in survival. She was locked up, betrayed and exiled, but she raised a son who changed the world. She kept her dignity. She kept her fire. At night, she might still walk the edge of Seriphos, staring out at the sea that once carried her away from everything she knew. She doesn't cry anymore. She just breathes. The stars shine above her, silent and cold, and somewhere a wind stirs, warm and golden. Not rain this time, just the memory of it. You're floating again. Except this time it's not punishment. It's not a sealed box or a stormy sea. It's just open water, sunlight flashing on the waves, and the rocking of a small wooden boat cutting through the calm. You're Danaë again, but not the frightened girl from before. This time you're a mother. Your son Perseus sits across from you, his face half-shadowed, half glowing like all heroes just before they make history. He's still young, still restless, still thinking about fate like it's a thing you can wrestle into submission. He's quiet today, he's thinking. Because even after slaying Medusa and accidentally fulfilling a prophecy by launching a discus into his grandfather's skull, his story isn't done. Heroes never get to rest for long. There's always another name to make, another monster to kill, another kingdom to save or break. Danaë watches him with the careful, quiet attention of someone who's already been through enough mythology to know how these things go. She knows he won't stay with her. He loves her, yes, but she can already feel the space between them widening. He belongs to legend now, and legends don't do well with domesticity. After Acrisius' death, Perseus inherits the throne of Argos, but he doesn't want it. That part's always glossed over in stories, but it says a lot about him. He feels the weight of the prophecy on his hands, the guilt of killing a man he never truly knew, so instead of ruling the city that wronged his mother, he trades it. Yes, trades it, with another king, Megapenthes, who rules Tiryns. They just swap kingdoms like baseball cards, which feels very myth and very impractical. Danaë, ever adaptable, moves with him. A new palace, a new people. It's peaceful for a while. The war gods are quiet, the sky is calm, and Perseus finally starts to build something that doesn't involve blood. He marries Andromeda, a princess he rescued from a sea monster on the way back from his Medusa errand. Yes, that happened off-screen. Don't worry, we'll catch up on it. For now, all you need to know is she's kind, beautiful, and surprisingly unfazed by trauma. They settle in Tiryns, raise children, 5 or 6, depending on the version, and rule together. Danaë gets to be a grandmother, at least for a few years. But even in these calmer stretches, the story never lets you forget where it started. Every feast, every child's laugh, every soft sunset over the hills is haunted by that first fall of golden rain, by the sound of waves slapping against a wooden chest. You can take the girl out of the box, but you can't take the box out of the myth. Danaë is older now. Her hair is silver, her skin creased with time, but her eyes haven't dulled. She walks the palace gardens at dawn, fingers brushing over thyme and olive branches, and thinks about Seriphos, about Dictys, the fisherman who raised her son like his own. She sends him gifts now, crates of wine and fine cloth, even letters, though who knows if he can read them. Gratitude stitched into routine. The myth forgot him, but she didn't. There's something beautiful in a quiet way about Danaë's arc. She begins as a locked-away daughter, a pawn in her father's fear, and ends as a queen who answers to no one. She doesn't seek revenge. She doesn't demand recompense, she just lives. And maybe that's the rarest myth of all, survival without bitterness. But her legacy doesn't end there, because her bloodline still matters. Perseus and Andromeda's children go on to populate entire chunks of the mythological world. One of their sons, Electrion, will become the grandfather of Hercules. Yes, that Hercules. Muscle-bound, monster-punching 12 labours guy. So technically, Danaë is Hercules' great-grandmother. Let that sink in. She's part of the deep-root system of mythology, the quiet foundation beneath all the noise. Scholars sometimes argue over Danaë's origin, whether she was once a goddess herself, demoted by storytelling over time. Some point to her name, which has echoes of ancient fertility figures, others to the idea that her bronze prison was a symbolic womb, and the golden rain a metaphor for life-giving power. It's poetic, sure, but the story that remains is far more grounded, and far more tragic. You can imagine her, years later, standing at the shoreline of Tiryns, the sea stretching out like memory. She holds a stone in her hand, warm from the sun, and tosses it gently into the water. Not in anger, just to see the ripples. She doesn't hate the gods anymore. There's no point. She just doesn't trust them, which honestly is fair. And somewhere far above, maybe Zeus watches. Not with guilt. Gods don't do guilt. But maybe with a flicker of acknowledgement. A thought he won't admit, that this mortal woman, this daughter he turned to gold, created more lasting legacy than any of his noisy storms or divine tantrums ever did. Danaë doesn't need Olympus. She built something better. With soil and patience and time, she made a life out of wreckage. And that, more than all the thrones and monsters and curses, is the real power buried in her name. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, you can almost hear the sound of waves again. Not violent, not full of dread, but rhythmic soothing. Like the sea exhaling. Like a chest, once sealed, now bobbing gently in your imagination, carrying not fear, but hope. The island of Seriphos is small, rocky and quiet. The kind of place the gods usually forget unless someone's about to be turned into a flower or struck by lightning. But for a while, this little patch of sea-cradled earth becomes a refuge. Danaë and Perseus drift ashore here after their not-so-relaxing voyage in a wooden box. And instead of more curses or monsters, they find something rare in Greek mythology. Kindness. Enter Dictys, not a king, not a warrior, not even a demigod. Just a fisherman, just a man with strong arms and a decent heart. He finds the chest bobbing near the shore, cracks it open expecting gods know what, and instead finds a trembling woman and a blinking baby who hasn't cried yet. Dictys doesn't panic. He doesn't turn them away. He doesn't even ask too many questions. He just brings them home. His house is humble, salt-crusted and sun-bleached. But for Danaë, it might as well be Olympus. She's known palaces and bronze chambers and royal traps, but this is the first place that feels real. Quiet mornings, clean air, no eyes watching her every move, just the rhythm of the sea, and a man who doesn't try to possess her. It's almost suspicious, this lack of agenda, but she slowly begins to trust it. Years pass and Perseus grows fast. He spends his days chasing seabirds, spearing fish, learning to throw rocks like discus, and, ironically, how not to drown. Danaë keeps him close, never quite letting her guard down. She tells him bedtime stories, mostly lies, about how his father was the rain. Not Zeus, not a king, just rain. It sounds gentle that way, like something that touched her, and left without asking questions, which in its own way is true, but peace as always is temporary, especially when there's a king involved. Polydectes, Dictys' brother, rules Seriphos, and unlike Dictys, he's got ambition, power, and a general aura of creep. He notices Danaë, how could he not? Even years after her ordeal, she glows. She's quiet, sure, but her silence has gravity. Polydectes wants her, of course, because powerful men in myths can't see a woman without imagining her as furniture in their palace. He proposes, repeatedly. She says no repeatedly, and that's when he gets creative. Polydectes knows Perseus is protective. The boy's grown tall and broad-shouldered, with storm-coloured eyes and an overly strong sense of honour. So the king stages a little trap. He announces he's marrying another woman, totally not Danaë, don't worry, and demands that every man on the island bring a wedding gift. Horses, specifically. Why? Who knows? Maybe he's planning a chariot-themed reception. Everyone scrambles to deliver. Everyone except Perseus, who's young and broke and a little too proud to admit either. So Polydectes, all smiles, says, "Well, you can't bring me a horse? Fine. Bring me something more impressive, like the head of Medusa." Record scratch. Perseus accepts, of course, because he's part divine and hasn't learned the concept of risk yet. He doesn't know this is a death sentence, or maybe he does and just doesn't care. Either way, he sets off the next morning with 0 gear, no map, and a vague plan involving monster beheading. Danaë watches him go from the edge of the cliffs, her hands clenched, the wind catching her hair like a warning. With her son gone, Danaë is vulnerable again. Polydectes doesn't wait long. His false wedding falls through, shock, and he returns to his original plan. He begins to pressure Danaë more aggressively. Offers turn into commands, compliments turn into threats. He tries to force her into marriage, assuming the island will look the other way. And he's right. No one dares oppose him, not even Dictys, who tries gently to interfere but is shoved aside. This part of Danaë's story is quiet, tense, and largely invisible. She has no army, no magic, no escape route, just her memory, her spine, and the hope that her son will return before things get worse. And Perseus does return, just in time. After slaying Medusa, navigating a sky full of gods, and rescuing a chained princess, again we'll get to her, he shows up at Polydectes' court like a hurricane wrapped in bronze. Danaë is there, standing to the side, regal despite everything. Polydectes is mid-smirk, about to unleash another public humiliation, when Perseus reaches into his satchel and pulls out Medusa's head. Boom, one glance, one final insult frozen mid-syllable, and Polydectes becomes a statue. No fanfare, no trial, just instant mythological justice. Perseus turns the court to stone, everyone who supported the king. It's brutal, efficient, effective. Danaë doesn't flinch. She just walks past the petrified face of the man who tried to own her and takes her place beside her son, alive, unbroken, and finally free. In the aftermath, Perseus appoints Dictys as the new king of Seriphos. It's a perfect choice, someone who leads with decency instead of fear. Danaë stays long enough to see the island begin to heal, and when Perseus decides to leave for Argos, she sails with him, not because she wants power or revenge, but because he's her son, and wherever he goes, she will go too. There's something hauntingly beautiful about Danaë's time on Seriphos. It's not a chapter of glory or fame, it's a story of quiet endurance, of staying alive when no one expected her to, of raising a hero in the shadow of trauma, and of proving without magic or weapons that survival is its own kind of myth. So tonight, if you hear the ocean outside your window, or just the low hum of the world spinning under your bed, think of Danaë. Think of a woman in a wooden chest, washed ashore in a story not of her making, who somehow built something strong from salt and splinters. You're standing at the edge of a rocky cliff, salt in your hair, sandals slick with seawater, and the sky bruised with evening. Somewhere behind you, the world is still catching its breath from the Medusa incident. But you're just trying to process the fact that your son, once a wide-eyed boy clinging to you on a raft, has just returned from beheading a literal monster. Danaë watches him from a distance now, not because she's proud, though she is, but because he's changing, fast. You can feel it in his shoulders, in the way he doesn't flinch anymore when someone says destiny. Perseus glows. That's not poetic exaggeration. He actually has this faint shimmer now, divine residue from the journey. Or maybe just the side effects of spending too much time around Hermes. Because, yes, Perseus didn't slay Medusa alone. No hero does anything solo, despite what the bards like to claim. He had help, and not just from mortals. The gods sent him fully kitted out like a mythological action figure. It starts with Athena. She appears to him, cold-eyed and wise, offering advice without pleasantries. She's been watching him, probably since the box in the sea, and she wants this done right. Medusa, after all, wasn't just a monster. She was a former priestess, a woman cursed by Poseidon's assault in Athena's temple, and while Athena's involvement in that whole mess is complicated, she's invested now. She wants Perseus to succeed, maybe to restore balance, maybe just for the narrative arc. Then Hermes shows up, all mischief and sandals with wings. He tosses Perseus a curved sword, sickle-shaped, wickedly sharp, designed specifically for beheading something that you can't look at. He also lends him a helmet of invisibility, courtesy of Hades, because apparently Greek gods share their magical inventory like divorced parents with a joint storage unit. Perseus is also given a reflective shield, shiny enough to use as a mirror, and a magical bag called the Cabyssus to carry Medusa's head once it's off. These items don't come from a gift shop. They are won by negotiation, sometimes from strange beings like the Hesperides, or by coercing information out of the grey ear, 3 crones who share 1 eye and 1 tooth between them. Yes, that's a real detail. At one point, Perseus steals the eye and refuses to give it back until they spill Medusa's location. Brutal but effective. And so, armed with divine hardware and an aggressively motivated attitude, Perseus flies, like actually flies. Hermes' sandals lift him into the air and he soars toward the edge of the world where the Gorgons sleep. The landscape shifts as he approaches, turning jagged, silent, unnatural. Statues litter the ground, warriors, animals, even trees, all frozen mid-motion. People who looked Medusa in the eyes and never ever looked again. Medusa herself sleeps in the centre of the ruin, hair writhing, face hidden. Not evil exactly, just dangerous, cursed. A woman whose story was rewritten until it became a warning. Some scholars argue she was a symbol of older goddess worship, demonised by the later patriarchal myths. Others say she was simply a tragedy-turned-tool, her head repurposed as a weapon for a hero's rise. Perseus doesn't fight her in a traditional sense. He doesn't shout or clash swords or engage in some cinematic duel. He creeps forward silently, using the reflective shield to track her movements, never looking directly at her, and then, one clean strike, her head separates from her body. A fountain of black blood erupts, and from her neck, 2 beings emerge. Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden giant with a sword. Because of course they do, it's mythology, even death comes with a surprise bonus round. He doesn't hesitate. He drops her head into the Cabyssus, cinches it tight, and flies away before her sisters can react. The wind screams, the sea below churns, and just like that, the monster is gone. Back in Seriphos, Danaë hears of this with a strange numbness. Not because she doesn't care, but because it's so surreal. Her son, the child born from golden rain, raised among fishermen, is now a myth. The kind people carve into pottery and misquote for centuries. She remembers holding him as a baby, whispering promises that he'd be safe. Now he carries a head that can still turn men to stone, and he's too busy rewriting his own story to slow down. The island prepares for his return. Polydectes, still scheming, has no idea what's coming. He thinks Perseus is dead. The court laughs behind their hands, imagining Danaë alone again, ready to be claimed. They have no idea they're about to become lawn ornaments. When Perseus arrives, he doesn't posture. He doesn't yell. He just pulls the head from the bag and lets the silence shatter. Polydectes and his allies freeze, literally. Their mouths open in mockery one moment, and in the next they're stone. Beautiful, cold, permanent. Danaë steps forward after it's over. She doesn't cheer, she doesn't gloat. She simply nods. Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it just arrives and cleans the room. This part of the myth is Perseus's glow-up, his moment of transition from boy to legend. But through it all, Danaë remains the anchor. The reason he fought, the reason he flew, the reason the gods even noticed him. There's a theory, whispered in academic corners, that Perseus's story was originally Danaë's. That in some older version, it was the mother who carried divine tools, who sailed into danger, who defeated the beast. But as the myths shifted, the spotlight moved. Her agency faded, her son took centre stage, and she became background. Noble, quiet, eternal. But heroes come and go, Danaë remains, in every version. A woman wronged, a mother fierce, a survivor who birthed a legend and asked for nothing in return. As the stars rise over Seriphos, you picture her standing in the palace courtyard, Medusa's head wrapped in linen, tucked far from sight. Perseus is somewhere nearby, laughing with Dictys, his cape fluttering like something out of a dream. Danaë watches, not as a spectator, as the origin, the calm in the middle of the myth. The air is thin this high up. You're floating, not metaphorically, but actually airborne, your feet dangling over the Aegean, the wind hissing past like a warning. You're Perseus, and you're wearing Hermes' winged sandals, zipping through clouds and silence. and trying not to think too hard about the contents of the magical satchel bouncing against your hip. Inside is the severed head of Medusa, still potent, still dangerous, and still radiating that quiet, ancient dread that seeps into your bones if you let your guard down for even a second. No one tells you what it's like to carry a myth inside a bag. You're tired, not physically, divine adrenaline is still doing its job, but in that deep, buzzing way that hits right after you kill a woman because the gods said it was necessary. She wasn't a villain, not really, but she was a threat. Or maybe she was just a tool. The line is blurry when you're a hero. Everyone expects you to act with glory. No one asks how you sleep afterward. You tighten your grip on the sword and scan the coastlines far below. You don't know where you're going exactly, just away. Away from the Gorgons, away from the cursed land where statues outnumber trees. Your mission is complete, and yet the story feels like it's still unfolding. Because there's always one more thing, and right now that thing is chained to a rock. You see her from the air first, a woman, alone, her arms shackled above her, her hair tangled by salt wind, her body trembling beneath the relentless sun. The coastline is barren, save for the giant sea monster rising from the depths like a mythic punishment with scales. This clearly is someone else's tragedy in progress. But because you're Perseus, and because no one else is going to do anything, you angle downward. Her name is Andromeda. You don't know it yet, but it will become part of your story, like an afterthought that takes over the plot. Her eyes are wide when you land. She's too dehydrated to scream. You don't ask questions at first, you just size up the situation. Woman in distress, monster inbound, gods probably involved, nobody else around, classic myth setup. But this one's different. She's not bait, she's a punishment. Turns out Andromeda's mother, Queen Cassiopeia, committed the classic Greek offence, bragging. She claimed her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, and since Poseidon is famously petty, he sent a monster to ravage the coast until Andromeda was sacrificed. No amount of prayers or apologetic wreaths were enough, so they chained her up and waited for something horrible to come out of the water, which is happening right now. So you do what any winged, sandaled hero with a magic sword does. You fight it. The monster is huge, ugly, and unfairly fast for something that's half reef. It has teeth like shipwrecks and a roar that scrapes the clouds. But you're clever. You dodge, you strike, you fly, and when brute force starts to fail, you open the satchel. One flash of Medusa's face, just one. The monster turns to stone mid-lunge, crashing into the shallows like a shattered cliff. Salt sprays, the air shifts, Andromeda blinks. You close the satchel before it ruins anything else. Afterward, everything is quiet except the seagulls. You unchain her. She's light in your arms, skin hot from the sun. She doesn't thank you right away. She's in shock. You carry her up the beach anyway, lay her on the grass, and pour water from your flask. It's only later, when her voice returns, that she says your name like it's already being sung. The rest happens fast. Her father offers her to you in marriage. You say yes before thinking about how weird that is. She's still in trauma recovery mode, but you figure she deserves something better than sacrificial rock girl. You marry her there on the beach, beneath a tangle of burning sky and leftover tension. The gods seem to approve, or maybe they're just distracted. You take her with you back to Seriphos, back to Danaë. Your mother greets Andromeda with that sharp, assessing look only survivors recognise. One glance and she knows everything. The chains, the shame, the sudden husband. Danaë pulls her close, no questions, just a hand brushing her cheek like, "Yes, I see you, you're still here." Together, the three of you make a strange little constellation. The mother, the son, the rescued queen. And then, as always, the story shifts again. The Medusa head still pulses in its satchel. It's quiet, but it doesn't sleep. The gods are already whispering about where it should go next. Athena wants it, of course. Her old temple, her old mistake. You're just the delivery boy after all. Andromeda wants peace, Danaë wants permanence, but you still feel the hum of movement in your veins. You don't know how to stop. The sandals itch, the sword calls. You've tasted legend now, and it's addictive. It erases sleep. It rewrites your sense of home. There's a fringe theory among certain scholars that the entire Medusa quest was symbolic, that her severed head represents not victory, but the silencing of a feminine force too powerful to be controlled. That you, Perseus, weren't a hero, just an instrument, a golden boy with good reflexes and divine PR. The same scholars argue that Danaë and Andromeda represent stages of mythic femininity: the locked, the exiled, the sacrificed. The women who orbit heroes, each carrying wounds no one wants to narrate. But all of that is for poets and professors. Right now you're just a man standing on the deck of a boat, your new bride beside you, your mother watching the horizon like it owes her something. The wind catches the sails, the satchel rustles, the gods are restless again. And behind you, back on that lonely beach, a stone monster lies half buried in the surf. A rock that once had teeth, a girl who once had chains, and a hero who once saw death in a mirror and didn't blink. You're chained to a rock, not metaphorically. You're Andromeda, and your wrists are literally bound above your head with rusted bronze, tight enough to leave marks. The sun's been baking your skin for hours, and the tide's creeping higher, and you've already cried until your body just stopped bothering. You know what's coming. You've seen what the sea does when the gods are mad, and today they're very mad. It started with your mother, Queen Cassiopeia, who couldn't keep her mouth shut. She looked at herself one morning in a bronze mirror, noticed a bit of age in her eyes, maybe a wrinkle forming, and, like many queens before her, panicked. She turned to Andromeda, young and glowing and still untouched by cosmic rage, and declared, "You're more beautiful than the sea nymphs," out loud, in public, repeatedly, which of course is the fastest way to get Poseidon involved. The sea nymphs, offended beyond reason, complained to their uncle, and Poseidon, never one to underreact, decided to destroy your entire coastline. Floods, earthquakes, a sea monster large enough to blot out the sky. The kind of divine wrath that turns palaces into puddles. So your father, King Cepheus, consulted an oracle, because that's what kings do when their parenting falls apart, and came back pale. The monster will only stop, he says, if we sacrifice the girl, meaning you. He says it like he's discussing livestock. No tears, no negotiation, he just orders the chains. And so here you are in a white tunic that's no longer white, tied to a cliffside like an offering. The people watch from a distance. You can see them, blurry silhouettes on the hill, waiting for your death to save their city. No one steps forward. No one offers to take your place. You're not even surprised. But just before the sea spill is open and the beast Raya, snarling and wet and the size of a temple, something flashes in the sky. You don't know what it is at first, just a flicker of bronze, a gust of unnatural wind. Then he appears, a man, flying. He's wearing winged sandals and an expression somewhere between panic and heroism. His clothes are strange, half practical, half ceremonial, and he's carrying a satchel that hums with some kind of power you can't name. He lands beside you with a controlled skid, takes one look at your chains and says in the most casual tone possible, "Don't worry, I've got this." You blink. Is he real? You're not sure. He unties your wrists with surprising gentleness. His fingers tremble slightly, but his voice stays steady. "Name's Perseus," he adds, like that means anything to you. He gestures vaguely toward the sea monster, which is now climbing the rocks like an extremely angry Godzilla. "Give me 5 minutes," and then he flies. What happens next feels like a fever dream. He dodges the creature mid-air, slices at its neck, darts between waves like a storm-spawned hawk. The monster screams, if that's what you can call the sound it makes, and then lunges, almost swallowing him whole. And that's when he pulls the head out. You don't see the face, or you don't need to. You just see the monster freeze. 1 second it's alive, and the next it's stone, its body crashing into the surf like a sunken island. Silence. Real silence. Even the wind stops. He lands again. Panting, soaked, bloodied, and weirdly humble for someone who just saved an entire kingdom with a flying decapitation trick. He helps you to your feet. You stagger. He doesn't push or grab. He just waits until you're steady again. People cheer. You barely hear them. Later, your father thanks him. Your mother clutches your hand a little too tightly, whispering that everything is back to normal. And then, of course, there's the reward. Perseus asks for your hand in marriage. The people chant approval. The priests rush to schedule a ceremony. And you, well, you say yes. Not because you're swooning, but because he saved your life. And because you don't want to go back to that palace. Back to the mother who sold your name to Poseidon, or the father who stood by while it happened. So you sail away with him. No plan, no map, just stars, sea, and the feeling that maybe this story isn't going to end the way the others did. You don't know about Danaë yet, his mother, but you will. You'll meet her, and she'll look at you like she recognises the salt still dried on your skin. She'll see the shackles in your past, and you'll know, for the first time in your life, what it feels like to be safe in another woman's gaze. Andromeda isn't just a footnote in Perseus' story. She becomes queen. She has children, sons and daughters who go on to rule and reshape myths. Some of their descendants become kings, some become constellations, and one becomes Hercules. Yes, that Hercules. There's a version of the myth where Andromeda dies quietly in old age. Her hair silver, her hand still calloused from the rock. And when she does, Athena places her in the sky, chained again, yes, but this time to the stars, immortal, unfading, a permanent light in the night sky, a reminder of survival. Scholars argue about whether Andromeda was real, whether she was an imported myth from Ethiopia, or a symbolic tale of sacrifice and colonial commentary. But the chains were real, the sea was real, and the terror of being traded for peace, that still echoes. You lie in bed now, listening to your own heartbeat and the whisper of night around you, and somewhere far above, Andromeda still hangs in the heavens, not screaming anymore, just glowing, quiet, watching. A girl who didn't ask to be saved, but who made something new from the rescue. By now, Danaë's story has slipped into the quiet, the loud parts, the golden rain, the imprisonment, the box in the sea, the king who wouldn't take no for an answer, the son who brought home a monster's head. There behind her, what she has now is a life, one that doesn't make the bards shout or the scribes scramble for ink. And honestly, that's fine with her. She lives in a palace again, but it's not the kind she once knew in Argos. This one is warmer, less haunted by the echo of her father's footsteps. It smells like salt and fruit and roasted lamb, and in the evenings the halls fill with laughter instead of footsteps and fear. Perseus is busy with kingly duties, diplomacy, city building, dodging fate like it's a drunken guest at a wedding. And Andromeda is often found in the gardens, tending herbs and pretending she's not still dreaming of sea monsters. Danaë lets them be. For the first time in decades, no one is trying to lock her in anything. And yet she's restless, not in the way of youth, but in that strange twilight ache of someone who's been waiting for the other shoe to drop for so long that its absence feels unnatural. She walks the coastline at dawn and watches the sea, always half expecting to see a wooden chest bobbing on the horizon again. Sometimes she thinks about Perseus, her father, and feels nothing. Not anger, not grief, just a void where a father should have been. He died, like the prophecy promised, not by sword or betrayal, but by a flying discus. It's absurd, really. A prophecy wrapped in slapstick. But fate doesn't care about dignity, it only cares about being right. The people of Tiryns don't know what to make of her. She's revered, respected, but they whisper. They say she talks to the wind, that she sings to olive trees in a language no one recognises, that when she stares at the sea it calms. You'd think she'd hate all that. More myth heaped on top of a life already too full of it. But she lets it be. Let them make her strange. It's better than being invisible. She has no throne and no temple, no title, but she has Andromeda, who treats her like a mother, and Perseus, who still looks at her with that same fierce protectiveness he had when he was small. She doesn't ask much of him now. He's done enough. Too much, probably, but she does watch. Always watches. One afternoon he returns from some war council or trade meeting with a different look in his eyes. Heavy, distant. He tells her he's thinking of travelling, of giving up his crown and wandering, maybe to the north, maybe further. Why, she asks, though she already knows. Because the story isn't done, he says. And that's when Danaë finally speaks the truth she's held in her chest for years. It never ends, Perseus. That's the curse. You'll fight monsters, you'll raise kingdoms, you'll father sons who do the same, but there's always another prophecy, another king who's afraid of you, another god with a plan. He doesn't argue, just lowers his eyes like a boy again. He wants to believe in peace, but peace doesn't last in stories like theirs. Later that night, Danaë finds Andromeda sitting by the fountain. They don't speak, they just listen to the water. Women who've been through enough know when silence is better than advice. Eventually the day comes when Perseus leaves. Not forever, but long enough. He gives the kingdom to one of his sons, Electrion, the one who always listened, and sails off toward the edge of his own legend, Danaë stands on the shore again, watching him disappear into the fog, just as she did when he was barely grown, heading off to face a Gorgon. This time she doesn't cry, she just places a hand on Andromeda's shoulder and says, "Let's go home." And home for once isn't a punishment. It's not a box, it's not a prison cell, it's not a temporary stop before fate catches up. It's a place she made herself, carved out of survival and sand and patience. She doesn't die tragically, or gloriously. She doesn't get turned into a tree or a constellation. There's no divine visit to collect her soul. She just ages like a human. One day she doesn't wake up. The servants find her still and peaceful with a faint smile that none of them can explain. They bury her on a hill above the sea, where the wind never stops and the gulls always cry like they know something we don't. Andromeda plants olive trees nearby. Perseus returns just in time for the funeral, silent as stone. He doesn't speak the whole ceremony. He just holds the scarf she used to wear around her shoulders and grips it like a shield. No statue is raised. No bard writes an epic. But Danaë's grave becomes a place people visit in the quiet hours. Not to beg for blessings or declare loyalty, but just to sit, to breathe, to remember that survival is sacred too. There's a footnote in an old text, half lost, barely translated, that says Danaë was once a goddess, that she came from a place older than Argos, where rain was sacred and bronze was holy, that Zeus didn't conquer her but joined her, and that when her mortal life ended, she returned to the clouds. It's not canon, not widely accepted, but sometimes, when the air is heavy and the wind smells like salt and coming storms, you could believe it. You could believe she's still up there, drifting in the clouds, watching the sea, not weeping, not raging, just watching. Let's pause here, just for a moment, and ask the question that's been gently nudging the back of your mind for the past, 10 or so stories. Why does Zeus keep doing this? Why does the king of the gods, lord of the sky, commander of clouds and thunder and cosmic order, spend so much of his eternal existence turning into swans, bulls, showers of gold, and whatever else gets him an invite to a mortal woman's extremely unwanted day? You'd think immortality might come with hobbies, maybe pottery, stargazing, counselling, but no. Zeus's divine pastime is creeping on mortals and ghosting them post-baby. From a modern perspective, it's frustrating and baffling. You can't help but wonder, is this a power thing? Is it a weird form of loneliness? Or is it just baked into the myth structure like tragic gluten, inevitable, sticky and everywhere? Ancient Greeks didn't exactly encourage critical analysis of their pantheon's moral compass. Zeus was a fact, he existed, he ruled, he messed around, end of discussion. His behaviour wasn't celebrated, but it was tolerated, explained away as divine nature, a storm too big to question. Just like earthquakes happened and crops failed, so too did Zeus fall out of the sky and ruin someone's peaceful Tuesday. But even in their tolerance, the Greeks weren't blind to the absurdity. The myths often have a wink to them, a nudge of irony beneath the reverence. There's always this unspoken tone of, yes, he's the king of the gods, and yes, he's also the reason you should never trust a pretty animal that makes eye contact. It's reverent, but also resigned, like watching a royal family member make questionable decisions on national television again. So why? There are a few theories depending on how deep into the mythological rabbit hole you want to fall. The scholarly take goes something like this. In the earliest days of human storytelling, many of these myths weren't about a single omnipotent being misbehaving. They were regional fertility stories, ancient nature cults built around sacred animals and powerful female figures. Zeus wasn't always Zeus. He might have been a bull god once, a sky spirit, or just a personification of rain. The stories changed over centuries. They got organised, institutionalised, and somewhere along the way the power shifted, from the women from the symbols of the earth to the Olympian patriarchy. Suddenly the once venerated goddess becomes a damsel, the bull becomes Zeus in disguise. The sacred act of divine human unity becomes an ambush, and the powerful priestess, she's reduced to Zeus's lover. That's it. No name, no story, just a notch in a god's mythological belt. It's not just disrespectful, it's erasure. You see this again and again. Danaë, originally a figure of earth and fertility, becomes the passive recipient of golden rain. Europa, probably once a goddess of the crescent moon, is recast as a girl too curious about a white bull. Io, a priestess of Hera, becomes livestock. Leda, whose children were possibly divine before Zeus ever entered the picture, becomes the woman who laid eggs after a lakeside swan incident. It's a mythic pattern dressed up as divine romance. But let's be honest, it's not romantic, it's predatory. Zeus doesn't ask, he doesn't woo, he arrives, he transforms, he takes, and when the story moves on, he doesn't. Which makes the real question less why does he do this, and more, why does the story let him? Well, because that's how power works in myth. The gods aren't moral. They're forces. They don't apologise, they don't learn, they just are. Zeus isn't meant to be admired. He's meant to be endured. The sky looms, the storm strikes, the king demands, and humans deal with it, like they deal with floods or famine or fate. And so the women in these myths, they become the reaction, the response. They weep, resist, survive, transform. Sometimes they're punished for existing, sometimes they become trees, constellations, islands. Sometimes they give birth to heroes who kill monsters and restore order. Sometimes they just fade, unnamed, into the margins of someone else's epic. But sometimes they stay in the story long enough to change it. Danaë raises a hero. Leda births a war. Europa founds a civilization. These women, used as vessels by Zeus, turn out to be the seeds of transformation. They don't get thrones, but they get legacy, and that's more dangerous than any lightning bolt. There's a version of myth, rare, fragile, where the women aren't just background, where Zeus isn't the protagonist, where his actions are interruptions, not purposes. In those tellings, it's the women who drive the myth forward, not the thunder, not the feathers, not the gold. A few modern reimaginings try to give them that voice back. Poems that rewrite Medusa as a victim of divine cruelty, novels that let Io run on her own terms, films that reframe Helen not as the cause of war, but as the excuse. Slowly the myths begin to bend just a little, as if even the old gods are listening differently now. Of course, the original Zeus, he's unchanged. Still hurling thunder, still eyeing the next girl with moonlight on her shoulders, still shape-shifting like a bored stage magician. His story isn't done, it never really will be. But yours can be. You're lying in bed now, somewhere quiet, with the lights dim and the hum of something ancient spinning beneath the surface of sleep. And you're thinking about clouds. Not the harmless kind, but the ones that hover a little too low, a little too quiet, waiting for the moment when no one looks up. Next time you do, remember, it's probably just weather. But maybe, just maybe, it's a god with terrible boundaries. Let's talk about Hera. You've seen her name pop up around the edges of these stories. Always a little stormy, always a little late, usually holding a grudge so sharp it could slice marble. Queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, of childbirth, of piku cocks for some reason. Also the cosmic equivalent of a woman who's been forced to attend every wedding where the groom is her husband, who's also cheating on her with the bride, repeatedly, and she's expected to bring a gift. It's easy to hate Hera if you're only reading surface-level myth. She's cruel, jealous, controlling. She curses innocent women. She turns them into cows, birds, monsters. She sends snakes after their babies. She's the eternal footnote in every Zeus falls in love with a mortal story. Glowering, vengeful, conveniently dropped in when a punishment needs assigning. But look closer, and you'll realise something. Hera isn't the villain of these stories. She's the only one treating the whole mess like it matters. Imagine being her, immortal, powerful, regal, tied for eternity to a husband who can't go 10 minutes without transforming into a cloud and ruining someone's future. And the worst part, no one ever holds him accountable. Ever. Zeus misbehaves and the world keeps spinning. The mortals suffer, the children are born, the chaos unfolds, and he just moves on. No consequences, no apologies, not even a stern talking to from the other gods. But Hera, she's the one who stays. She's the one who sees it all unfold and decides, fine. If there's going to be vengeance, she'll handle it. She'll make herself the divine cleanup crew. The problem is, she doesn't aim her wrath at Zeus. She never really can. So instead, she takes it out on the women. The girls, the priestesses, the nymphs, anyone who ended up on the wrong end of a thunderbolt-fueled romantic detour. You could call it misdirected rage. You'd be right. But you could also call it grief. It's the fury of someone who's been betrayed so many times she doesn't know how to react to love anymore. So she turns it into revenge. And not just spontaneous tantrums, no. Hera is strategic. She plans. She curates revenge like it's art. Every story is its own exhibit. Take Io, for example. She doesn't just punish her, she hires a 100-eyed security guard to watch her 24/7, then follows that up with a gadfly, a tiny, endlessly buzzing instrument of torment. That's not casual anger. That's organised retribution. That's a spreadsheet of pain. Then there's Semele, mother of Dionysus. Zeus shows up, gets her pregnant, and promises her anything she wants. Hera slips in disguised as an old woman and whispers, "Ask him to show you his true form," which, in divine terms, is code for immediate vaporization. Semele does. She's incinerated. Baby survives, eventually stitched into Zeus's thigh, yes, really, and Hera adds one more tally mark to her cosmic revenge wall. Or how about Leto, another one of Zeus's affairs? Hera curses her so that she can't give birth on land, any land. Leto ends up delivering twins, Apollo and Artemis, on a floating island because every solid surface refuses her. That's how thorough Hera is. She thinks in geography. She even targets the children. Hercules, born from one of Zeus's many mortal flings, Hera tries to strangle him with serpents in the crib. Later, she drives him mad, which leads to, well, a lot of unpleasant labours and a very famous lion pelt. All because he was born with the wrong father. To the ancient Greeks, Hera embodied the dark side of marriage. The chain, not the garland. The loyalty that starts to rot. She wasn't seen as romantic, she was inevitable. You could pray to her for fertility, sure. For the strength to survive childbirth, yes. But you didn't go to Hera for affection. You went for endurance. And yet there's tragedy in that. Hera, for all her wrath, never leaves Zeus. She stays, over and over, through all the disguises, the affairs, the illegitimate children with heroic destinies. She holds her position as Queen of Olympus like it's a curse. She doesn't want more power. She already has it. What she wants is respect. And immortals are terrible at giving that. There's an undercurrent in the myths that Hera's vengeance is less about the women themselves and more about maintaining order. She's the goddess of marriage, after all. It's her divine domain that keeps getting violated. Every affair is a cosmic breach. Every child born of it is a reminder that her sacred role has been turned into a joke. So she responds not with tears, but with consequences. It's cruel, yes, but it's not random. In some obscure versions of myth, Hera tries to curse Zeus himself. But it never works. The other gods either intervene, or he escapes, or some elaborate loophole saves him. The imbalance is clear. Zeus acts, Hera reacts. He gets worshipped for his lightning. She gets blamed for the storm. Modern-day readers have tried to reclaim her. There are novels now that paint her not as the scorned wife, but the exhausted divine matriarch trying to hold an ungovernable universe together. A woman surrounded by men with too much power and zero restraint. And when you frame it that way, it's hard not to root for her, even if she sometimes turns women into cows or birds. At night, when the skies flicker with distant storms, maybe she watches, not with jealousy, not anymore, but with fatigue, the kind of exhaustion only eternity can teach. She's tired of being the villain in someone else's bad romance. Maybe that's why she gave the peacock its tail. Hundreds of eyes to see everything. Not just the betrayals, but the patterns, the truths under the myths, the quiet, brutal repetition of being expected to stay and endure, while the storm dances off to ruin someone else's life. So next time you hear Hera's name whispered like a threat, remember, she wasn't the one who started this. She just stayed when no one else would. You're standing in a field of marble statues. It's quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of silence that holds its breath. You're careful where you step, not just because the grass is wild and the stones are cracked, but because every figure frozen in time was once alive, once moving, speaking, dreaming. You're in the aftermath of Medusa, long after the battle, long after Perseus, long after the hero's glow has faded into myth. But she's still here, in pieces, in echoes, in debate, because Medusa is more than just a head in a bag. Her story is one of the strangest reversals in all of Greek mythology, starting as a beautiful woman punished for her own assault, and ending as the literal face of fear. Everyone knows the ending, the snakes, the gaze, the curse, but not everyone knows how it started. And depending on which version you read, It's either the tragedy of an innocent or the wrath of a goddess misfired. She begins as a mortal priestess, a devotee of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, protector of the rational and the reasonable. Medusa serves in her temple, vows of purity wrapped around her like armour, and then one day Poseidon shows up. Lord of the sea, brother of Zeus, Olympic menace number 2, he wants her. And gods in these stories don't ask. Some say he seduces her, some say he forces her. But either way, it happens there, in the sacred space meant for silence and worship, and that's the real blasphemy. Not the act, but the location. And when Athena finds out, she doesn't punish Poseidon, she punishes Medusa. Because in myth, goddesses don't always protect women. Sometimes they protect power. Athena turns Medusa's hair into snakes, makes her face so terrible that one look turns a man to stone. Not just beauty destroyed, but weaponized. She's exiled, sent to live at the edge of the known world, beyond maps, beyond pity. And there she waits, not for a hero, not for revenge, but because there is nowhere else to go. You can't help but ask, was it a curse? Or a shield? Was Athena trying to destroy her? Or protect her the only way she knew how, by making her too dangerous to touch? The debate has lasted for centuries. In art, Medusa shifts constantly. In early works, she's monstrous, grotesque, meant to inspire terror. A warning carved into the temple walls and soldiers' shields. In later pieces, she's tragic, beautiful even in horror, soft-eyed despite the snakes, a woman whose rage is finally allowed to be seen. Feminist reinterpretations pick her up like a torch. They strip away the hero narrative and place the focus on her. The victim who became invulnerable. A woman whose body was taken, then made untouchable. The monster as metaphor for power reclaimed. She didn't ask to be made dangerous, but once she was, no man could ever hurt her again, unless of course he didn't look. And that's where Perseus comes in. He never looks her in the eye. That's the key to surviving her. He uses a mirrored shield, sees her only in reflection. It's clever, it's respectful even, but also symbolic. He never sees her, just her danger, just the part of her that helps him win. When he cuts off her head, the moment is framed as triumph, a clean kill, a hero's prize. He places it in the cabesis, shows it off, uses it to defeat his enemies. Eventually he gives it to Athena, who mounts it on her shield as a permanent threat. But what does that mean? That Medusa becomes a symbol of divine protection? Or that her suffering is turned into an ornament? Imagine being reduced to a face on someone else's armour. There's a version of her myth, less told, more whispered, where Medusa knows what's coming. She doesn't fight Perseus. She closes her eyes, lets it happen. Not because she's weak, but because she's tired. Maybe she thinks, let this be the end. Maybe she thinks, at least it's not Poseidon again. Maybe she's just ready to be done being used. But she never really goes away. In Roman times, her image becomes more widespread than ever. You find her carved into floor mosaics, etched into rings, painted on pottery. People believed she could ward off evil, keep curses and spirits away. She's turned into a protective sigil, not feared anymore, but revered. A monster rebranded into a goddess again. In modern times, Medusa gets reclaimed outright. Her face becomes a logo, a movement, a warning. She stands for women who've survived assault, women who've been told their beauty was their downfall, women who are tired of being punished for what was done to them. And yet she's still complicated. You can't flatten her into a symbol without losing some of the raw mess underneath. She's both victim and weapon, both curse and power. She's the line in the myth where everything shifts from tragedy to fury. Some scholars argue that the earliest myths had Medusa as divine all along before the Olympians rewrote the story. That she wasn't turned into a monster but worshipped as one. A guardian spirit, a protector of thresholds, an embodiment of the gaze that looks back. It changes how you see her, not just as a target but as a boundary. The edge of the world staring you down asking, are you ready to cross? Tonight, as you lie back in your bed, your room dark but your mind still spinning, think of her not as a cautionary tale, but as a challenge, the face in the mirror that won't flinch, the rage that sleeps with its eyes open. Medusa never blinks first. There's a story, almost forgotten now, about a nymph named Callisto. She doesn't usually make the top 10 in Greek mythology popularity lists. No dramatic wars, no golden apples, just a quiet tragedy tucked into the underbrush. but her story is worth sitting with, especially when you start to realise how many of these tales don't end with triumph or transformation. They end with being changed into something, just to make someone else's mistake more manageable. Callisto is a follower of Artemis, which in myth speak means she's part of the tight-knit group of huntresses sworn to remain virgins, live in the woods, and avoid the drama of Olympus. She's devoted, strong, probably had killer aim with a bow and a way of moving through forests like the wind didn't dare touch her. For a while she's safe, protected by the goddess of the moon, the wild things of women who run instead of kneel. But then Zeus sees her. You can already feel it, can't you? That creeping dread. That moment in the narrative where the sky darkens and the story pretends it's still going somewhere good. Zeus doesn't approach Callisto as himself, of course not. That would require honesty. Instead, he transforms, this time into Artemis. Yes, he pretends to be the very goddess Callisto trusts most, and when he embraces her, she lets her guard down. She thinks she's being held by a friend, and then it's too late. When the real Artemis finds out, she's furious. Not at Zeus, mind you. That would be irrational. No, her anger turns on Callisto, who is now pregnant and broken, and no longer pure by the impossible standards of their circle. Artemis banishes her. The rest of the nymphs shun her, and Callisto, once wild and fast and uncatchable, becomes utterly alone. She gives birth to a son, Argus, and for a moment there's a sliver of peace, but then Hera gets involved. Because of course she does. Callisto, like so many others, becomes a symbol of Zeus's disloyalty, and Hera, still playing the eternal clean-up crew for her husband's wandering affections, takes revenge not on Zeus, but on the woman, again, but instead of snakes or madness, this time Hera turns Callisto into a bear. Yes, a bear! She flees into the woods, beast-shaped and hunted. She watches her child grow up from a distance, no longer able to speak or comfort or explain. Just a shadow in the trees, a mother in exile. Years pass. Argus grows tall, strong, a hunter like his mother. One day, while tracking game through the forest, he comes across a great bear. He draws his bow. His aim is perfect. Callisto knows what's coming. She rears up, not in threat, but in recognition, trying to tell him somehow that it's her, that she's still in there. But she can't speak. She's just fur and breath and memory. And that's when Zeus finally intervenes. Not when she was tricked. Not when she was cast out. Not when she was cursed into a body that wasn't hers, but now, just as her own son is about to kill her. Now he steps in. He grabs them both, Callisto and Argus, and throws them into the sky. It's supposed to be a kindness, a way of preserving them. He turns them into constellations. Callisto becomes Ursa Major, the great bear. Argus becomes Ursa Minor. They circle the heavens, always visible, never touching the horizon. Eternal, immortal. But here's the thing, immortality in myth is never the same as peace, it's just permanence. A story stretched into the sky, locked into place. Callisto isn't restored, she's just rebranded. Her pain is made into starlight, and the gods call it a gift. There's a part of the myth where Hera, still angry, curses the constellation so that they never get to rest. Never set, never dip below the ocean like the other stars. Always circling, always visible, always stuck. That's the part that gets you, that they can never sleep. Modern readers have tried to rewrite her story. They paint Callisto as a feminist icon, a symbol of survival and maternal strength. They reframe the bear not as punishment, but as power, fur and claws and ferocity. They imagine her running through the woods, not in fear, but in freedom, leading Argus beside her, mother and son reunited in the wild. But the original myth doesn't end that way. It ends in orbit. It ends with silence. The scholars debate what Callisto originally was. A local bear goddess, perhaps, folded into the Olympian narrative and reduced to a morality tale. Or maybe she was always meant to be a constellation, and the suffering was just the mythological path to get her there. Because in Greek mythology, greatness and grief are never separate. To be remembered, you have to be ruined first. Danaë's story has echoes of this. So does Andromeda's, so does Medusa's. Women turned into symbols, into stars, into stories that someone else tells. But maybe, just maybe, when you look up at the night sky and you see that giant bear shape arcing across the dark, you're not just seeing a myth, You're seeing endurance. A woman who was tricked, shamed, cast out, transformed, and still managed to shine. Even if she never got to rest, even if the gods called it mercy, you're on the edge of myth now. You can feel it in the way the stories soften Frey and start to echo back on themselves. The names you've been hearing, Danaë, Andromeda, Medusa, Callisto, they don't sit still. They stretch and shimmer like heat above marble, like the haze of something too ancient to ever fully resolve. And tonight, as you lie in your bed and let the last corners of sleep drift close, you wonder what it all meant, what it still means, because somehow you've just spent hours wandering the quiet tragedy of Zeus's lovers, and the word itself barely fits. Were they lovers, or victims, or was there no clean category for them to fit into at all? That's the thing about Greek myths. They don't offer comfort so much as company. You walk alongside these women not because they offer perfect morals or redemptive arcs, but because their stories still whisper something you recognise, something unspoken, the awkward mix of awe and ache that comes from being caught in a story much larger than yourself and not being given a say in how it's told. Start with Danaë, locked away in a bronze tower, sentenced to solitude because of a prophecy she didn't write, visited by Zeus as a golden rain, imagery so poetic it almost hides the violation. Almost. And then, instead of vanishing, she endures, cast out in a box, raising her son on the kindness of strangers, surviving a king who wanted to marry her like ownership. She becomes a queen, yes, but not the kind with parades and monuments, the kind who keeps surviving long after people stop noticing, the kind who builds a quiet legacy out of splinters. Then Andromeda, chained to a rock, not for her own crimes but her mother's ego, left out as a sea monster's sacrifice so her kingdom could be spared. Rescued, married, renamed, she disappears into Perseus's narrative like an asterisk. But there's a moment just before he arrives when she's still just a girl against the sea, choosing not to scream anymore. That moment sticks with you, because even in helplessness she held herself still. Medusa, of course, is the one whose story never sits still. Victim, monster, symbol, goddess. The face that turned men to stone but couldn't save herself. Beheaded by a hero who didn't hate her, just needed her gone. Carried like a weapon, mounted like a warning. And yet her image survives. Not his, hers. The stare that still turns heads. The rage that became beautiful. And then Callisto. Transformed not once but twice into a bear, into a constellation. Her humanity stolen and her motherhood stripped from her, only to be frozen in the stars as a kind of half-apology. The Greeks said it was honour, immortality. But eternity isn't kindness when it comes without choice. All these stories orbit one figure, of course, Zeus, who never changes, who never learns, who exists not as a person, really, but as a function. Power without accountability, desire without consequence. He takes shape, takes space, takes what he wants, and then the story moves on. But the women? They stay. They linger in the sea air, in the grain of carved stone, in the constellations etched into the night sky. The world remembers their shapes, even if it forgets their names. And yet, beneath all the sorrow and transformation, there is something fierce in each of them. Not triumph, not always, but defiance. The kind that doesn't get written into the bard's songs. The kind that lives in gestures, in glances, in the way they carry on, even when the gods have already moved to the next chapter. What Greek myth rarely says out loud is that most of the women in these tales weren't born to be legends. They were forced into the frame, caught in the ripple of someone else's prophecy, someone else's punishment, someone else's crown, but they adapt. They twist the shape of the story from inside. Sometimes they get erased, sometimes they get elevated, but always, always they endure. Scholars still argue over the meanings. Was Danaë originally a goddess of the earth? Reduced to mortal, the stories were rewritten. Was Medusa a warning or a protective symbol against male power? Was Callisto a local deity absorbed into a patriarchal narrative and recast as a cautionary tale? It doesn't really matter, because stories aren't just about where they came from, they're about who keeps telling them. And you've heard them now, you've walked their roads, you've stood beside Danaë as the sea rocked the chest beneath her. You've looked through the mirrored shield at Medusa's still form. You've watched Andromeda's hair whip in the ocean wind. You've listened to Callisto's silent growl echoing through the trees, and maybe, just maybe, you'll carry a piece of them forward with you, Not to worship, not to fear, but to remember. Because myths don't end, they sleep, they wait, they sharpen their meaning in the dark. So tonight, as you let yourself drift, think of them, not as stories on a page, but as ghosts that chose to keep walking. Not because they were written to, but because they refused to vanish. They weren't golden, or divine, or monstrous. They were human, and they were never just lovers. And now your eyelids are heavier than history itself. You've wandered through palaces and prisons, stood ankle-deep in prophecy, and watched as goddesses turned into monsters and girls became stars. It's been a long journey, 25 stories of golden rain, sea monsters, silent rage, and eyes that never blinked again. And you're still here. So congratulations, you survived the sad stories of Zeus's lovers. Barely. What's strange about Greek mythology is how it keeps looping like a tired lullaby, sung by a thunderstorm. The gods mess up. The mortals endure, the stars fill with names you can't pronounce, and you, just a modern dreamer wrapped in blankets, feel the weight of it all humming quietly in your chest. You're not expected to remember every detail, not the names, not the kings, not the temples or the monstrous children born from lies, but you'll remember the feeling of stories too old to forget, of voices that never got to speak finally whispering through cracks in the stone. Maybe now, when someone mentions Medusa, you'll think of more than a head full of snakes. Maybe you'll see Danaë and her son in a floating chest, refusing to drown. Maybe you'll see Andromeda on a rock, not just waiting, but watching. And maybe when you look up at the night sky and spot a shape that might be a bear or a bow or just a smudge of light pretending to be a hero, you'll remember Callisto, still circling, still shining, still there. Now take one last breath, a slow one. Let the air settle, soft and deep, like a story ending just under your ribs. You've earned your sleep. The myths will wait. They always do.